War was my life. Every waking moment, I did nothing but think about war. It took priority over being a husband, over being a father, a son. I turn my weapon on him and I'm flipping my selector lever from safe to fire, and I'm beginning to squeeze the trigger. It's almost like I had a good angel and a bad angel on my shoulder. I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast or anything before.
All right, then, Mr. Jeff Tiegs, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, well, we've been chatting a little bit. It's kind of just like we turned the cameras on right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I've been very much looking forward to this. And you're going to hate this, but I'm going to give you an intro for people that aren't familiar with your story. So 26 years in Army Special Operations, dozen combat deployments, Army Ranger, Green Beret, Delta Force Operator, Delta Force Troop Commander, 5 Bronze Stars for distinguished service during combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a Silver Star for valor during combat in Iraq, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, ultra marathoner, so 100-mile races plus, which you've run several, and founder and president of Skull Games, which is a nonprofit that combats sex trafficking, and author of Where Have All the Heroes Gone? So again, man, I really, really appreciate you coming out here and spending some time with me. So thank you.
Thank you. I think New York City is just an amazing place. I love it here. How people spend a lifetime living here is, I think I don't know what the equivalent of living in New York City is for Bronze Stars and Silver Stars. Like there has to be something, So it's always interesting when people read the bio, because you feel, I feel a little bit disconnected from it, and it's looking in the rearview mirror. But then it also it drums up so many different memories, and every single one of those things that you described was a lot of work, in a phase in my life that kind of all built. And it takes a while to do all that stuff.
Yeah, it's got to be weird hearing that rattled off, thinking about when you were like, a private in the Army, an 18-year-old kid, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did this event last year for veterans, and they said, hey, some people are going to wear their uniforms. Some are just getting those little mini medals. So I pulled my uniform out, and this dress uniform that I hadn't looked at in years. And you look at this dress uniform and you're just like, who in the world is this guy? Like you accumulate this stuff, then I bought the cool little mini medals, and then they got the little mini Halo, badge and the scuba badge and, all this kind of stuff. And it's weird to describe, because of course I have an inherent pride looking back, but it certainly doesn't reach the level of pride, because it was just so hard to do. Every single thing: scuba school, sniper school, Halo school, Ranger school, it was just hard.
Yeah. We're going to dig into it all. So that's why I've been looking forward to this. But let's just start it at the beginning. Where did you grow up, and then what got you interested in joining the military?
Yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin, so a small town called Pewaukee. My mom and dad and brother still live there. My sister lives nearby, so I have a brother and a sister. I was a middle child. Blue collar family. My dad worked on the power lines. He was a tree trimmer for many, many years, and then he ended up, as he got older, working at a power plant. And then my mom was a secretary in a bunch of different roles. They sacrificed. I didn't realize that it was a sacrifice at the time, to send all 3 of us to private school. We went to Christian school from grade school all the way through high school. Wisconsin Lutheran was the religious tradition that we were in for grade school and high school. Again, I didn't really appreciate that was a sacrifice. That we could have gone to public school for free, but they took it out of high to send us to these schools and be taught in this tradition that I'm forever thankful for. And I'm sure we'll talk about that again. And growing up, there's a few things that stand out in my mind, because people ask me about leadership, or why join the Army, and all of these things. And I have a couple interesting memories. Oh, here's one that I'll share with you. Um, I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast or anything before. So it was an evening. I don't remember, but it was an evening in Milwaukee, and like good Milwaukeeans, my mom and dad are out bowling with friends. Right, they're out bowling, and my sister worked at a restaurant nearby. It was about a mile and a half away. Uh, Ultimately, my brother and I ended up working there as well. And my mom and dad said, "Hey," my sister's name is Jacqueline. They said, "Hey, walk up and meet Jackie as she's coming home from work." 'Cause all of us were too young to drive at the time. And I walked up to meet my sister. I think my brother was with me, also my younger brother. And right where we met, this car pulls up, and the door opens, and the dude yells, "Get in!" And we start running. So it's a two-lane road with a boulevard. He he ends up driving the wrong way, so he follows after us the wrong way on this boulevard lane. We run down this big hill, and he parks his car, and he's got the lights, and he's yelling at us from a distance. And we're running through the woods, you know how neighborhoods are, from the busy road through a field, and we get to our house, and we run all the way there, and we're pretty frantic. And I run to get the hidden key. Everyone's got the key hidden around the house. And as I run to get the hidden key, he comes driving. We see his car driving down the road, and he's like, looks like he's coming to our house. He's not quite at the driveway yet. Um, and I grab the key, and I open. I'm trying to open the door. And one of the things that I remember as it was happening, the movie Poltergeist. In the movie Poltergeist, when that was the last movie that scared me that I remember. Like when I was a kid, it was scary enough. And they're running, and I think they run out of the house because it's all it's all haunted. And they get to the car, and the person's like shaking and can't get the keys in. And I'm thinking to myself, that's BS. That wouldn't happen. And as it's happening to me, I'm thinking of, oh, I guess it does happen. Like I can't. I'm shaking. And we open the door, and we run inside, and I tell my brother and sister, hey, run downstairs and call the police, and I'll take care of the rest. So they run downstairs. I start flipping off all the lights on the inside of the house and turning the lights on the outside of the house, and I run into my dad's room where I knew he kept a gun in his bedside table. So I grab the gun from my dad's bedside table, and by the time I come back out, this guy's in our driveway, door open, headlights on, and he's at our front door, and he's yelling at us from the front door, "Get out!" I can't remember exactly what it was that he was yelling. And we had one of a wooden door with the really the windows, like the six windows. So it's a very thin pane, and I'm afraid he's going to punch through and unlock. So I'm standing in the house yelling at him. I'm probably 12 years old, maybe 13, because my sister was a little older than me, and she didn't have her license. So my sister was probably about 15, which makes me around 12 or 13 at the time. And I'm yelling at him, and I have the wherewithal to flip the light on so he can see me, because I'm not sure if he can see me. I'm in the dark, right? So I'm holding this gun. I flip the light on, and I'm pointing the gun. So he's inches away. He's looking at me, and I'm about it's arm's length away, and I'm pointing this gun at him and saying, "You need to get out off my porch, or I will kill you." And the guy puts he goes like this, and he has a big flashlight in his hand. And he wasn't armed that I could remember. And he says a couple things, and he backs away off the porch. And he's kind of standing in our yard. And I open the door, and I come out, and I walk him all the way to his car, and he gets in his car, and he drives away. Um, and then I'm concerned that he's going to come back. So I hide under a tree in our yard, and I'm sitting there with my dad's gun, and a car comes in, and it's not him. It was an undercover police. It was a non-marked police car, and I'm kind of freaked out, right? And I'm heightened, and the cop gets out, and I pop out from the tree, and I'm like, who are you? What are you doing? And he's like, hey, I'm police. And I'm like, the hell you are. You know what I mean? What's going on? Kind of a thing, and he talks me down, like put the gun down, put the gun down. He pulls out his gun. I forgot. He pulls out a gun, so now we're pointing guns at each other. And he's like, put your gun down, kid. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to hurt you. I'm police, and I'm quizzing him, like, what police force are you? You know what I mean? And he's like, he's like, basically he's like, kid, shut up, put the gun down. I'm here to help you. You called 911. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I put the gun down, and everything ends happily ever after. But what the point of this story is, I realized as all of this was happening, you're making decisions in real time. What should I do? What should I do? And my brother and sister lost their minds, right? Like they were not able to function. The best they could do was run downstairs and call 911. So as it's happening, I'm making decisions. What's right? What's wrong? Turn this off, turn that off. And I did my own little AAR, after action review, which I didn't know it at the time, right? I'm a 12 or 13-year-old kid. But as I was looking back at it, I was like, I kind of kept my head. Like I was scared, but I wasn't that scared. I had made mistakes, and what was interesting too was when I go back and look at it, that putting the key, I left the key in the door. It was just the key. There was nothing on it. But I got it open. We ran inside, and I locked the door. But if the dude would have looked at the handle, the doorknob, the key was sitting in there. So I had made mistakes. Like I recognize it's like, look, you were afraid and you made a lot of mistakes. I'm not sure what you did was right or wrong, but you didn't lose your mind, you know? And the number one thing that was going through my mind was I need to protect my brother and sister, you know? So it's interesting. And this is that idea. I mean, we're talking 40 years later, more than 40 years later. I don't know how much of that I realized consciously, but I do remember thinking this through and thinking this idea of, okay, that was a scenario where it was my job to protect and defend some folks that weren't ready to protect and defend themselves. So there's something that God has given me in my character or whatever that I'm well suited for this, you know. And then it came up a few times, protecting my sister from bullies, and um, other times too where I felt like I was bullied, but made the decision that I'm not going to identify as being bullied. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be a victim. Like, there's these older kids that are picking on me, and this is unfair, but that's okay. I'm not going to identify as that, and I chose not to be a victim. I'm still not a very big guy. I'm not even, I'm 5'8" on a good day. You know what I mean? I was always kind of a smaller kid, nothing special physically or intellectually, but there was just a quality that I understood myself to be a protector and a defender. And somehow other people recognized that. Somehow other people saw that in me. I was always a leader. I was always like the dude that was the arbiter. Hey, Jeff, can you settle this for us? Or hey, picking teams, making sure they were fair, or the captain of the wrestling team, or the cross country team, or the track team, or student body in high school. The student body. Like I was always in these positions of leadership. Um, but I always looked at leadership as a service. I didn't look at it as a reward. I looked at it as a service, and dare I say, even like a burden. You know what I mean? Like maybe sometimes a burden, but like a responsibility. And I say that where everybody wants to be in charge, right? But being in charge is the utmost responsibility. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry, if you're doing it right, and if you're doing it with a sense of service. Um, so again, those are things that kind of shaped my life and got me to the point of a senior in high school, not really recognizing what I wanted to do next. And that kind of led into finding my way into the Army.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So that was like your first adrenaline spike.
My first gunfight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, because that's something that's pretty commonly said about the unit and that tier 1 level is the calm and the chaos,
Mm.
right? Like when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
when you are in the middle of a gunfight, but yet your radio calls are just like you and I are talking right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I joke that if they would make a movie about what it's actually like, people would be bored. Because we're not yelling, we're not running around. It's very calm. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I also appreciate the technology. Like I can communicate long distances because of the comms we have. When I was a young ranger, we did yell commands and hand and arm signals, and just the act of yelling gets you riled up. You know what I mean? When you don't have to yell, you're able to kind of stay much calmer. So yeah, I think it's quieter. People aren't talking to each other. It's not like clear, 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 moving, advance. All right, like no, like it's like jujitsu. It's like water. It moves nice and smooth.
Well, it's because you're a professional, though, and I think it's more interesting. Obviously, like Hollywood portrays it to be explosions going off all the time, but
Yeah.
like that's a gunfight, man. That's a crazy thing that
Yeah.
99% of people can't even fathom.
Yeah.
So that if they were dropped into that situation, they would be going nuts and losing their shit. So the person that is just super calm and this is just another day at the office, like
Yeah.
that, in my opinion, that's way more interesting
Yeah.
than the opposite of it.
Yeah. No, and it really does come with training and getting that. And it's a perfect analogy with the jujitsu. It's so complicated and complex that as you train and master it, it isn't chaos. It's control. And I like what you said is professional. It's hard for people to understand. Like that was my profession. It wasn't just my hobby. It was my profession. I studied it and I lived it every second of the day. Even all of these other pursuits like the ultra marathon running and all these things, that was all in support of this profession, And I remember trying to explain this to people. And Michael Jordan talks about it where like when the pressure came on, like when it was like 2 seconds left on the shot clock, he wanted the ball. You know what I mean? And he explained it like time would slow down for other people, but not for him. So it's like he would get the ball and like time would almost be distorted. And he could understand what people were doing, like when they were moving where they needed to move and what they were going to do next. And like he was in real time, but everyone else was kind of like stuck in molasses or moving slow. And he wanted that ball, and he knew that he had the confidence to make that shot. And that's how combat felt to me very often. Not always, what I mean? Just like I think the NBA finals probably feels different than just an average game, So not every single time did we achieve this level of flow, you know what I mean? And kind of that. But the there were many times in combat where I felt like time was moving slower for my opponents and maybe even elements of the people that worked with me. And it was like, let's say it was me and my 3 team leaders that we were all like moving this fast and the rest of the team and our enemies were moving this fast. And it's a weird existence because it does feel just like Michael Jordan was saying. It feels like everyone else is moving in slow motion and you're able to manipulate and shape the outcome. And to me, that was the high that I sought. That's the high that I miss. I mean, it wasn't the combat, it wasn't the fighting, it wasn't the killing, it wasn't the adrenaline rush, it wasn't the violence. All those things have a good side and a bad side to it. It was that ability to reach this level of flow where you seemed like you were outside of just kind of time and fate. I know that sounds bananas, but you hear it. Again, you talk to a professional athlete, talk to Tiger Woods, talk to Michael Jordan, talk to Steph Curry. You know what I mean? Like talk to these pro athletes where they reach that level. So if you can reach it in sport, certainly you can reach it in combat.
That's fascinating, and I'm sure we'll come back to it when we start talking about operations and stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, same thing, right? They're professionals, you're professionals, and they're, some of the people that you mentioned, they're the best of the best among those professionals. So when they talk about that flow state, it's fascinating. And then when you add that other layer of complexity, just, I don't know, life and death consequences,
Yeah.
major geopolitical consequences, it's
Which you don't think of at the time, you know. Um, and again, jujitsu, I'm just there now. So 10, 11 years of jujitsu. It wasn't my profession, right? I did it, to this day, I do it 4 times a week, Um, but doing something 4 times a week, it took me 10 years to reach this point now where I'm in that flow zone and you're not. That's, because I just know so much jujitsu and I've been in it so often, I know what you're going to do, and I push you to do those things. So I think that's that same idea of a professional in combat. I didn't do it 4 days a week. I did it 7 days a week, multiple times a day. So you reach that level of proficiency. Again, those 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, or all these folks talk about it. When do you really master something? It's 10,000 hours of doing it. Um, and yeah, that's where they try to get you to as a special ops soldier is get you those 10,000 hours.
black belt, man.
It's a black belt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, and hopefully I'm sure we can draw some comparisons. Well, you already are with the parallels between jujitsu and combat. Like if you're rolling with somebody and they drop their left hip a little bit, then you're
Yeah.
thinking, okay, you might be going here, 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 and you're thinking 3 moves ahead, which you can apply that same thing to
Yeah.
playing a game of chess against your enemy.
Yeah. It's
Fascinating.
I'll tell people. So like if you and I rolled jits, right? Like one of the very first things when we start, I at least want this contact. So people can't see it on
They
camera.
can.
Okay,
We got a wide angle here, yeah.
we're touching
I'll show it.
toe to toe
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now. Like so,
Tip to
like
tip.
you probably wouldn't even notice that my toe is touching yours because we're ready to get in a fight. But even if you do notice, you don't really think about it. But that touch tells me a million things. I can feel the tension in your body. I can feel if you're going backwards, forward, left. You know what I mean? So almost always before we start, I just need that, and I'm being flooded with inputs. Even now, I can tell you're uncomfortable. Like I can feel that you feel this is super awkward. You know what I mean? Do you feel this is awkward?
No, I'm enjoying this.
Okay,
Yeah.
you know what I mean. But so that's a perfect example. Is how you turn inputs into other things people don't see, and that was that incredible orchestra in combat, and what the American war power gives you is you're seeing things from all different angles. You've got ISR in the sky. You're being flooded with information, but then it does come down exactly like you were saying, that I could almost predict the way the enemy was gonna react. And the stories that stick out in my mind are the ones where I was wrong. You know what I mean? And we'll talk about a couple of those where I said let's go left and I should have said let's go right, or follow that guy and we should have followed that guy. Um, and honestly, Dalton, in the hundreds and hundreds, I estimate probably around 1,000 targets again, because you're hitting different houses. It'd be all these different things. Um, there's really only 4 or 5 that stand out in my mind, and they stand out in my mind because it's like, oh, you made a mistake. Um, and then again, the beauty of the American war machine is you're able to go back and look at that mistake, and you can sit down with the other professionals and say, hey, why did we read that wrong, or what was it that we missed? Because you're always wary of buck fever. You're always wary of being too um, interested in the finish. You know what I mean? Or you're making sure you're not being lackadaisical, and you always want to be in that spot. And one of the things that we found out as we would rotate, they were trying to find the optimal rotation time, and we looked at injuries. We looked at, hey, when do guys get hurt and or killed in combat? And it happens at the front end, and usually it's the new guys where they just, again, this innate thing that we're talking about, where a team leader, he just innately knows to go left instead of right. And if he would have gone right, he would have got shot, kind of thing. Like somehow you just figure that out, you know? So the new guys would get hurt early, like within the first couple weeks of combat. Again, this is true throughout history. We know that World War II, Vietnam, all the way through. It's the new guys have to get seasoned. And then at what point do you start to get inured to combat and you start making mistakes? Either because you're too aggressive and you want to force something to happen that isn't ready to happen, or you're being lackadaisical. And that's somewhere around the 100-day mark. So we had people study this, we had psychologists study this, and it dictated what our deployment cycles would look like. So we concluded, and again, anyone who's studied this better than I, we concluded that around 100 days, 110 days, a human can just sustain a high level of acute awareness and that ability to fight. And then after 100 to 110 days, you start to make mistakes. And that was what drove our op cycle. So we started to rotate in that window. And yet when you look at the regular military between the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, how long were we putting them overseas? A year to 18 months. And it's the same thing. You're going to look at this window in the front where guys are getting hurt, and then the window at the back where guys were getting hurt. It's just not possible to maintain an operational tempo. And again, we were not landowners. We were not battle space holders. We weren't responsible for controlling battle space. When we hit the ground, we were doing ops that night. You know, the handover with the element that was relieving us, we would do an op that morning. They would take it that night. You know what I mean? So it was a different style of fighting. And I hope we don't forget that. I'm hoping we're capturing these lessons because it's going to happen again. You know, and are we going to have to learn the hard way that a human can fight for 100 to 110 days and then mistakes begin to happen? Or can someone write this down and remember it for the future?
Well, hopefully the 20-year wars that we just wrapped up, you know, there's enough lessons in blood that, you know, won't have to learn them for the next one, right?
I hope.
And that's something we'll come back to on the op tempo piece, especially at a tier 1 level with Surge Delta Force in Iraq.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to talk to you about that one.
And you know, you know, when you first reached out to me and I listened to most of Brent's podcast, he's the first guy that I've heard say publicly as well, hey man, the surge had nothing to do with troop strength. The surge had to, let's fight this like it's a war. And if you're the bad guy, you die. That's what changed the surge. That's what precipitated the Arab awakening. It wasn't some sudden awakening. It was Al-Qaeda and kind of that the gray zone, the people trying to figure out who am I going to align with, the Americans or Al-Qaeda, and they're looking to see, oh, all the Al-Qaeda guys are dead. Everyone I know who decided to go with that group is no longer breathing. I think I'm going to go ahead and ally myself with these guys. And I'm almost convinced, I can almost guarantee you, we won't learn that lesson. That what will go down in history is this analysis of troop strength and how many folks you need to fight a counterinsurgency and what that ratio looks like and all that nonsense. No. If you're going to fight, you need to fight. And you need to kill your enemy. And in Iraq and Afghanistan both, all we were ever talking about was a couple thousand people. That's it. We needed to kill about 1,000 people in Iraq and about 1,000 people in Afghanistan, and those wars would have been over. The rest were just constantly reading the tea leaves on which side I'm going to partner with. And when we look weak and we show weakness, they choose the other side.
Well, the gloves were off at one point, and then somebody forced them back onto your hands, I guess, right? And the analogy that Brent used, and for people that aren't familiar, Brent Tucker, he was a former Delta Force operator and assaulter at the unit. That's the episode that Jeff's talking about. And the analogy that he used, which I thought was a good one, hopefully I don't butcher it, is terrorism is like digging a trench. Have you heard this one?
Keep going.
So it's, let's say terrorist one picks up the shovel, and the objective is to dig the hole, is to dig the trench, right? So he gets a little bit into the trench, he gets maybe like a foot down, and then he gets killed, right? And the next guy sees the shovel laying on the ground, and they say, well, he must have fucked up. He must have done something wrong. I'm smarter than him. I'll dig it a little deeper. But we want to get to the point where essentially every time somebody picks the shovel up, they die. So that shovel becomes a death sentence.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, because they start to make different decisions. So make sure we have a throwback, a recall to that, because when we talk about one of the stories that I share from my book, where that exact thing happened, when the dudes kept picking up the PKM, and we kept the sniper team kept dropping them, it was the exact same scenario where at some point, as enough bodies got stacked, they stopped trying to pick up the PKM and assault us. So turn the shovel into a PKM, and then the other one is this. It's the same thing that I'm looking at in the counter trafficking space. Right now, less than 1% of pimps and traffickers are ever prosecuted, which is a pathetic number. So if you're a young man living in a shit environment and you don't see any way out, you don't see that the American dream is for you, you see you've got to join a gang, sell guns, sell drugs, or sell women, you have a 99% chance of getting away with selling women. That's a logical choice. Now, we can't kill those guys. We're not at war, but we can imprison them. So that's my goal before I retire completely, is that we change that number from 1% to 2% to 4% to 8%. I don't think I'll get to 16%. But somewhere when you start getting into the double digits, now that young man is also making that decision. Oh, if I try to sell women, I'm going to do 200 years in prison. I'm going to get life in prison. It's just not worth it. Maybe I'll go get my GED and, work at Subway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you life and death is quite the motivating factor. Again, Americans don't think of that very often because we live in a cushy life. Our forefathers used to have 8 kids to make 5. You know what I mean? Like, we had big families because you died. You died young. 8 to make 5, 8 to make 4. That's why you had those families that had 8. Hey, all 8 made it. And then you had the other family where 2 made it. It's just a life and death is a different. We keep it at bay in modern America, but it's a motivator.
Yeah, and we'll come back to it when we start talking about skull games, because we're talking a little bit at breakfast. The further we get away from the survival line here in America, the more we create our own problems to be upset with.
Yeah.
But so you're the first Ranger I've had on the show. So what is the Ranger training pipeline, or what was it at the time? Was it RIP?
Yeah. And I will tell you, man. I don't. I'm a Ranger. Like it really is like deeper down, like sitting on top of the Ranger is this special forces guy. This idea of free the oppressed, de oppresso liber. That's the motto of special forces. That's in my blood. But even deeper than that is the Ranger creed. And it's not all that complicated. I joined the Army when I was 17 years old, and I really do feel like I can pinpoint when I became a man, and that was as a Ranger. And it was RIP, the Ranger Indoctrination Program. They changed it to RASP, which is the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. So somewhere along the line, with the PC police decided indoctrination was inappropriate. And I was just there. I was just in Columbus, Georgia, Fort Benning, that they just changed to Fort Moore. I was down there, and I can go to where my RIP was. Um, Lawson Army Airfield, I think it's still called Lawson, is the airfield at Fort Moore, and there's a steep little hill that they call Cardiac Hill that you would run on and train on, and just off to the side of Cardiac Hill was the old World War II barracks where I went to RIP, and in between these barracks there was this. Do you know the Georgia red clay? Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh, you need to get down to Georgia just to get your fingers in that red clay. There's this red clay. It's the color of that silhouette you have back there. That you know what
Okay.
I mean? It's this orange red clay, and when it's wet, it like it's not mud. It turns to clay. Um, and there was this Georgia orange red clay, and they called it Red Square. And they would line us up on Red Square, and they would just smoke the daylights out of you. Just push ups, sit ups, flutter kicks, and they would pour water on you, and they'd pour it in your face, and you'd stand there, and you'd close your eyes, and the ranger instructor would stand in the back, and this sound just I just can hear it like a crisp. If you don't want to be here, fall out to the rear. If you don't want to be here, fall out to the rear, and you'd hear guys shuffling, or they would pretend because you'd keep your eyes closed and your head down, you know what I mean? And I was too afraid to open and look and see if they were bullshitting us, But lo and behold, they'd have you open your eyes, there'd be guys gone, you know what I mean? So you're out in Red Square for hours, and they were just testing you and testing you and testing you, and the ranks would get thinner and thinner and thinner. So I can go back to that little piece of Georgia clay because I remember very distinctly thinking, I'm not going to quit. They cannot make me quit. I will not quit. If they're going to pull me and say I don't have what it takes, that's their call. But I will not quit. I don't think I at the time recognized that I was I definitely crossed over from being a boy to a man there. But when I look back at that, I can go to that plot of land and go, that's where I became a man, right here. You're standing on the very plot of land where I decided I'm going to be a man. And I find that really cool. Like how many people can say that there's a place on earth where I can stand, And I make this joke because those barracks are no longer there. There's weeds and brush all grown over, but that red square clay, it's still there, and nothing will grow there. And I make the joke because hundreds of young men just they left their dreams. They quit. They didn't decide they were going to be men. They decided this is too hard. I don't want this enough, and I'm going to quit. So that's like a little poisoned plot of land off of Fort Moore, Georgia, that nothing will ever grow because it's spoiled with broken dreams. So I can stand there with pride and be like, okay, I didn't quit here. But at the time, it was by far the hardest thing that I had ever done. Um, and all it does is those 3 weeks is that testing period, and then they get you at least up to speed enough that when you get to a battalion, you can get integrated into a squad. And then that first year at Ranger Battalion is still a year of testing and training, and that combination, I think, is done better. I think now again because guys went to war, that it was much more of an integration period. So when I went back as an officer, I went through RASP, Ranger Assessment Selection Program, um, which was very different than RIP. It wasn't so much of a testing. It wasn't so much of like a brutal testing where they're just going to wear you down. It was task condition standards. You need to do this in this amount of time, this many pull-ups, this many says run this fast, ruck this fast, shoot this. It was very much more a standards based thing to work through. So I went through RIP as a young private, and then I went through RASP as a lieutenant, second lieutenant. I remember exactly what I was. Two very different experiences.
So for you, where does that I won't quit come from? Because I think, I don't know, when I try to conceptualize it, when I think about any really hard military specific training, there's, in a lot of it, there's a very high attrition rate. Like people quit, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about it, the only two things that I can think of are that's ingrained in you, right? Something in your childhood kind of shaped you into being that person who won't quit. Um, or it was you really, really wanted being a ranger bad enough. So when you think about it, what was it for you?
It's a good question. Um, I think I almost blended it together. Like I said, I wanted to be a man. I wanted to be a man worthy of being a ranger. I didn't understand what a ranger was. I mean, I didn't know what it was. I had heard rumors of it, you know what I mean, and ridiculous stories of what the rangers were. But I really think I felt like I wanted to be a man worthy of becoming a ranger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, you've kind of put me in a spot here where this is the first time I'm really kind of thinking about that. Um, yeah, I didn't really wanna be a ranger. I didn't really wanna be a Green Beret. I didn't really want to go to scuba school or go to sniper school or halo school. I wanted to be a man worthy of those things. Does that make sense? Yeah, you're really yeah. Like when I hear guys that say, "Oh, I always wanted to be a ranger," or "I always wanted to be a Delta Force operator," it rings hollow with me because yes, I did, but so yeah, you've helped me. That's what I like about podcasts.
Yeah.
You force us to kind of think about these things. So I
Right.
wanted to be a man worthy of X, Y, or Z.
Mm.
And even we were talking at breakfast about our faith life. You know what I mean? I want to be a man worthy of my faith walk. Like David is called a man after God's own heart. Like I want to be called that. I want to be called a man after God's own heart. And what does that look like? You know, it doesn't look like prayer. You know what I mean? It looks like this guy's a man who protects the vulnerable. He's honest. He has integrity. He's a man of his word. You know what I mean? And all those things they really started as a ranger. So RIP was its own thing. And then when I got to a battalion, I went to First Ranger Battalion in Hunter Army Airfield down in Savannah. Um, Oh, and we gotta go back. We're gonna have to go back and talk about even before I got to RIP. There's a good story. So when I got to Savannah, Georgia, Hunter M Airfield, I I saw Ranger NCOs, E6s, E7s. These and we used to have a term back then that guy was hard. It was in the climbing community too, like the hard men of climbing, the hard men that were the high altitude mountaineers, the men that conquered Everest, the men that conquered K2, these Antarctic explorers, they used to call them hard men. And we still had that term, like the biggest compliment you could give a guy back then in the Rangers was, "Oh, Tiegs, he's hard. Oh, Dalton, he's a hard dude." You know, so I'm meeting these hard men, these E6s, these E7s who had been rangering for years, and I was really lucky to have some of them take me under their wing. Again, these things that I was talking about earlier that I didn't recognize. Like I didn't recognize necessarily the leadership qualities that I had. You know what I mean? Or I didn't recognize my physical abilities to just suffer and run and ruck and do all these things. But some of these guys did, and they took me under their wing early on and really developed me and mentored me. Um, and I tried on different things. A lot of them, a lot of those guys were feared. Like they were. I'm going to talk about a guy named Sergeant Moore, Sergeant Harvey Moore. Um, and I one of my goals is not to tear up on these discussions, but Harvey makes me tear up because he died heroically. No one will know Harvey Moore, okay? And you shake you nod because I do write about Harvey. I was in Alpha Company. Harvey, I believe, was in Charlie Company, and because the best ranger competition was people know about it now. It's fairly well known. It's still in its infancy back then, 88, 89. I think it started in maybe 84ish. I don't know, but Harvey was one of the early best ranger guys, and again, I've got the propensity to just run long and ruck long and kind of suffer an obstacle course and all that kind of stuff. So Harvey recognized that, and he took me under his wing and he developed me. And it was kind of a weird relationship because I was an Alpha Company Spec 4, and Harvey was a E7 Sergeant First Class in another company, and we kind of became friends, and he was a little older than me, and he had this scar. I mean, dude, he was like, just look him up, look up his picture, Harvey Moore, and he's got this scar that reportedly he got in a bar fight that somebody broke a bottle and cut his face, and I think it's a true story. Harvey was just a hard man, It's like that. Remember Bonds from Platoon? You know what I mean? Like Harvey was like Bonds. He was a skinny he was a skinny rucker. Like we were all skinny runners and ruckers back then. Like that was the test of a good ranger team leader or squad leader was how far you could run and ruck and how you could navigate through the jungle. That was it. Like actions on the objective was totally secondary because the difficulty was getting there.
Right.
Like, can you get us there? Because there was no GPS. It was navigating map and compass. So the people that understood how to work through the woods and get you to the target. Once you got to the target, that was the easy part. It was the people that could get you there, and you could get there in one piece. And Harvey was legendary for that. And Harvey was feared. I mean, Harvey scared the shit out of people. And he was just nice to me, and he mentored me, and he developed me, and we worked together, and he I was one of these best ranger trainees forever, but Harvey was mean, and he would yell at people, So I remember a period of time. I think I was an E4. I think I was a corporal, where all these guys I respected, they were hard asses, man, and they just yelled at you all the time. And I think I tried it for like a week. You know what I mean? I just get over here, private. I did it for like a week, and I was just depressed. You know what I mean? And I realized it's just not me. Like I'm not that guy. And how can I be hard and how can I be disciplined without pretending I'm an asshole? You know what I mean? How can you do that? So I remember trying on different kind of leadership styles, and the one that suited me is what you get right here. Is like we establish the standard. You either meet the standard or you don't, and that's where the hardness comes in. You had 10 minutes to do that. It took you 10 minutes and 1 second. You're out. You know. So I owe those guys a lot, and I think about them often. And again, people that are listening, please look up Harvey Moore. He died heroically. There was a training accident in Antelope Lake up in Utah. I got out in the spring of '92. This happened, I believe, in October of '93. It happened in the fall of '93. Helicopter went down in a training accident, and Harvey and a bunch of other men kept returning to those downed helicopters just to save these men, and he ended up drowning. So he's a hero of mine. Um, can't wait to talk to Harvey in heaven and hear some more stories from him, what he's been up to the last couple decades. Dude had some stories.
Yeah, that's something I talk about in here is just the importance of strong male role models in a kid's life, and especially because there's a lot of men that watch this, right, that are of the age of either being a father to a son or whatever, or just being a mentor to somebody.
Yeah.
But just going back, what was your relationship with your dad like?
Great. Yeah. Again, and I certainly don't want this to be any slight on my folks. My parents were terrific. A great relationship with them. It's become distant over time. Again, I think I read about that in the book, and with the wars, my focus and dedication became to my wife and kids. Like, other than the men and women I fought with, it was my wife and kids, and there was very, very little room for anyone else, to include my mom and dad and my brother and sister and childhood friends. Um, but I also think, like that era, workaholics, right? Like my dad he worked, and he was constantly looking for overtime, time and a half, double time, all those kinds of things. And I respected that. I never really remember being slighted or hurt by that. And in fact, I think I thrived in that. I thrived in that independence. My mom, in the summers, my mom was working and my dad was working, and we would have like a babysitter who would watch over us, and we were basically on our own, throughout that whole time. And then when we became old enough to take care of ourselves, so I feel like I really thrived under that style of parenting. Yeah, I mean, my dad's a hard man. Again, I say that with to honor him, but he was kind and gentle, and we knew he loved us, and I know he loves us, and it, yeah, it was a great relationship. It's a difficult one for me to encapsulate because I left at 17. You know what I mean? And it, it's been so intermittent since then. Um, I think it had a different impact on my brother. My brother was a little bit younger. I think he missed my dad a little bit more than I did because my dad was working. I really, really understood that my dad was providing for us as a family. You know what I mean? And like, stop bothering him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I certainly don't want to slight my parents at all. I love them. They're wonderful, wonderful people. I owe them everything. But when we talk about this development very specifically, again, how does a dad develop you to be a ranger or a special forces guy or a Delta operator? It really takes, he sets that baseline and that framework where, again, you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal. You're a man of your word. Like those things matter. So that base that I still stand upon, my mom and dad created, and then as that kind of pyramid goes up higher, it's all these other men and women that continue to pour the specifics in.
Yeah, and the implication with that question, asking it after we talked about Harvey is not like, did you not have that in your dad? The implication is like,
Yeah,
with a lot of people that do really hard things, and specifically the unit, right? They have some sort of origin story, and for
yeah,
men, it is their dad, and maybe their dad instilled the "don't quit" in them. How many goals did you score in the game today? Why
yeah,
was it 3, not 4? That sort of thing. That
yeah,
comes up a lot in these sort of interviews. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I think no, 100%. And I think there are a lot of guys that I've worked with that had bad fathers that that beat them and were violent towards them. Um, I would say it was very common, and I think that's where a guy finds himself in this line of work. It's like, okay, I'm never going to let that happen again. And I don't know if we'll get to this point further down, but there's a lot of men and women that find themselves at the highest levels in the military or in sport because they're coming from neglect or violence or abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It's my own personal belief that what's really contributing to suicide in the military, and especially in the ranks of special operations, is part of the war and that experience. Part of it is, who am I now that I took this uniform off? But we're also at that age where that childhood trauma begins to bleed out, and we don't know what to do with it. There's a reason why childhood abuse rears its head when someone's in their 30s or 40s. There's something in our bodies that can hold this trauma for like 30 or 40 years. It's just like the abuses that we saw in the Catholic Church. How come everyone that came forward was like a late 30s, 40-year-old man? Because that's when that trauma begins to leak. You have like a 20-year, 25-year span of these iron boxes that can hold trauma. And then they start to melt away. And it's my belief deeply that that's what's happening in our ranks. Is they've been holding trauma at bay because they were beaten as kids or sexually abused as kids, and that didn't go away. They never dealt with it. Um, and you become like a superhero, right? Like you were abused as a child, and there's a couple ways you can go. Um, people become violent and they become criminals. you know, you've got that small percentage that actually just becomes normal, normal, healthy people. And then you have this other group of people that's probably equivalent to the same numbers that become criminals, that become like super achievers. They become super achievers in business, they're workaholics, or even in the military, you almost quite literally turn yourself into a superhero. You're a soldier and you're bulletproof and you protect others. And what happened to me as a kid will never happen to anyone else on my watch. Um, and I think we need to come to terms with that. And I'd like to see a psychologist study this more. And the psychologists that I've talked to do agree, like, yeah, man, we got plenty of abuse in our ranks. A lot of men, and especially the women that go into the military to reach those highest levels, th- w- almost all of them suffered a level of trauma, and their reaction to it is to become a superhero about it. Um, and what I'm excited about is now we have that next generation. I went back to Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty now, uh, last year, maybe 2 years ago. A friend of ours committed suicide. Again, same deal. How do we come to terms with that one? And I was really amazed how many of my peers' children are joining the military. So, like, what we went through and experienced and our absence did not taint them. Somewhere along the line, they understood and recognized that this is an honorable line of work. And so many, it blew me away how many children were going to West Point to become officers or Annapolis or even enlisting. So what I love that for that a family of service, but I also know whatever that husband or wife suffered as a kid, they've broken that chain, you know, because abuse does have a tendency to repeat itself. Not always, but it has a tendency to. And that person that can break that chain, and I'm seeing that in our ranks. So those that set out to become superheroes, they did it. It was just the war. They've broken that chain of abuse that they were used to. I think some of them recognize that, and some of them don't.
Yeah, I think I want to make that a big piece of the conversation because I think that specific conversation is very important to have. And kind of as we were talking about offline, there's a lot of things that the American public doesn't need to know about as it pertains to Delta Force. But there's
Hmm.
a lot of things that we do need to be aware of when it comes to you guys getting out, right?
Yeah,
And everything that comes along with that.
yeah.
So we'll for sure get there.
Well, and I think one of the themes that we're talking about as professionals and even like professional athletes, in many ways, you're a professional athlete. Like this machine has to run right for me to go back and forth to combat. And just like a pro athlete, you're getting dinged up. You're getting shot, you're getting blown up, you're blowing out a knee, you're blowing out a shoulder, you're blowing out your neck, you're blowing out your back. And we were treated like a professional athlete. Like you had the surgery, you did the physical therapy, and you were back in the game. Um, and there were years there where a lot of guys suffered with pain, and we fought through the pain, and we medicated the pain, because this is what we did. We go and fight. And I think we're beginning to understand now how pain and turns into psychological trauma, and how psychological trauma becomes physical pain. They're strange bedfellows, just like a traumatic brain injury. Almost all of us have levels of TBI just because of the work, the amount of shooting we did, the amount of explosives in training, the parachuting, all of these things that we did. Even in training, we didn't recognize all these micro percussions were creating little tiny traumatic brain injuries. And then that TBI turns into depression or post traumatic stress. It's like it's the what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the TBI like symptoms come from the psychological trauma or the physical trauma?
Mm.
You know, and we're still trying to figure all that out. And then again, this guy that I'm talking about who ended up killing himself uh, last year or the year before, it was that crazy cocktail of physical pain that he endured for years and years and years that turned into psychological pain. Um, yeah, and guys just can't see their way out of it.
So I think before we get into Panama, I think we skipped over a story from Ranger Battalion there. You wanted to talk about?
So, yeah, like before a movie starts, you're like, this is a true story, but some names have been altered to protect the living or protect the dead. So this is one of those. I'll alter the name a little bit, out of a tiny little bit of respect. And then the other thing you and I were talking about, and this is the thing. Like this is how I remember it. You know what I mean? Like memory is a weird thing. And there's a bunch of things that we'll talk about. Again, we've talked about when we do talk about Panama and Ranger Hale, I would love nothing more than Ranger Hale to reach out to me and tell me his side of the story. That 2-star officer in Afghanistan, I'd love nothing more than to sit down with him and share both of our sides of the story. So recognizing you're getting one side of the story, but it still makes a good story. So I was told that to become a Ranger, you volunteer, you join the Army as an 11 Bravo, and in infantry training course, you volunteer to go to airborne school. And then when you're at airborne school, you volunteer to go to the Rangers, and that's how you become a Ranger. Which is true, but there's a whole lot of stuff that can happen in between, right? The real way to become a Ranger is you get it in your contract that says, after infantry training, I'll go to airborne school and then I'll go to the Ranger Assessment Selection Program. But I didn't know it at the time. And even 11 Bravo is a light infantryman. 11 Mike, 11M is a heavy infantry, mechanized infantry. And then there's all sorts of different infantry. So 11 X-ray means you're entering the Army as an infantryman. They will decide if you're going to be mechanized or if you're going to be a Charlie, which is a mortarman, a Tango, which was I'm forgetting the name of it, an old anti-tank weapon that was a piece of garbage. You know what I mean? So me as a dumb kid, I signed a tow missile gunner. That was what it was. As a dumb kid, I sign up as an 11 X-ray, and my recruiter's like, "Oh yeah, you'll be fine. Do this, do that." And as I was kind of feeling everything out, I was beginning to understand. Oh, wait a minute, you're an 11. Talking to the other dudes in the basic, they're like, "Oh, you're an 11 X-ray. Like, you need to be an 11 Bravo." Because like they only take a couple mortarmen in the Rangers. If you're a heavy guy, they don't want you. You know what I mean? So I remember, this, and it happened. It two different times. It happened, and this set me on my path in the military for the rest of my life. You're standing in the platoon, and the drill sergeant walks out, and he's like, "Hey, you three go over there. You three go over there, and you three go over there." They're like, "You're going to be 11 Mech. You guys are going to be Charlies. You guys are going to be 11 Tangos, tow gunners." And he threw me in one of the mixes. I don't remember which one it was, And I know. And then I'm thinking immediately, I think it was a tow gunner, which they don't take tow gunners in the Rangers. So I'm immediately thinking, oh, wait a minute. If I become a tow gunner, I can't go to RIP. You know what I mean? And I'm looking at my drill sergeant, and I'm recognizing he don't care. You know what I mean? So he told us to go and report, to these different places, and I just didn't go. And I kind of waited, and nothing ever came of it. So I'm like, okay, I dodged that one, And then a couple weeks later, he does the same thing. He's like, "Hey, you go over there, you go over there, you go over there. You guys are going to go to Korea. You guys are going to go to Germany and some other place. I don't remember where it was." And he puts me over in this slot of Korea, which again, if you're going to Korea, you ain't going to ranges because that's a necessity job that they're filling back then. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, is this the level of thinking that's going into these assignments? Because the other thing too is Korea is a singleton job. It's unaccompanied, So it's like the married guy who just got pushed over there is now going to be a year or two away from his wife. You know what I mean? And plus I'm thinking, dude, all these weirdos, how many weirdos in this platoon want to go to Korea? Like there's a bunch of kids that would love nothing more than to go to Korea or go to Germany. Like you're not even trying. So same deal, he kind of just parts us off like this. He's like, from you guys over, you're going to do this, and same thing. I got away with it once. So like those guys break off and go walk somewhere. And I'm just like, doo-doo-doo, doo-doo-doo, and nothing ever comes of it. But I tell people this, and I counsel young men and women that talk to me now about going into the military. I tell them, the military isn't looking out for you. It's too big of a machine. You have to be the master of your own destiny. And I share this story. It's like, could you imagine if I would have gone to Korea, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here with you. I probably wouldn't have married my wife because I would have been 2 years away from her. She was my girlfriend at the, like it just changes people's lives. And I don't expect every NCO in the military to have that level of analysis every time they have to make decisions. But those are some pretty big decisions, So I already had this experience, and I was able to volunteer to go to airborne school. And like my recruiter told me, the first day of airborne school, they call you into this classroom and they do the ranger pitch. Who wants to be a ranger? Sign up here. So I sign up. I'm gonna go to RIP afterwards, and I'm happy. Nothing. I get orders to go somewhere, and I'm still a mosquito wing private, right? I got one little hash mark on my collar. I get orders to go somewhere, and I ask my squad leader, "Hey, I'm supposed to be going to RIP. Like I shouldn't be going to get an assignment somewhere." And he's like, "It's just the Army. They'll, it's the RIP takes precedence. They'll annul those orders, and you'll go to RIP." I'm like, "Okay." So airborne school ends, and the ranger instructor shows up, and back then, the Rangers wore OG 107s, which is the olive green, the solid green drab uniform, the one that you're familiar seeing from Vietnam movies. It's just that green, and it had slanted pockets. It was a badass uniform. It was in a hot weather jungle uniform, and they had jungle boots that were spit shined, and then they had that black beret. So a Ranger stood out. Everyone else was wearing the woodland camouflage, the BDUs. So you stood out dramatically. So this Ranger shows up, and he's wearing his OG 107s, starches and spits, looks sharp as hell, and he starts reading off the people that are supposed to go to RIP. And he doesn't read off my name. And they all line up, and they start marching to RIP. So from airborne school to that piece of red clay I was talking about, I don't know, maybe it's a mile. It's not very far. And they're marching on their way. And I run up to him, and I'm like, "Sergeant, signed up. I'm supposed to go to RIP. You didn't call my name." And he's like, "What's your name?" Looking at his clipboard, like, "You're not on my list. Get the fuck out of my face." And I'm just like, So I run away, and then I go to, my squad leader in airborne school again. I'm like, "Hey, like something got screwed up. I'm not going to RIP, and I've got these orders, and something's wrong." And he says, "Go down to the Patches building and see Mr. Buttersworth." So I'm changing the name slightly. And I'm like, he's like, he's in charge of records. He might be able to straighten it out for you. So I was at Fort Moore, like I said, a couple weeks ago, and I tried to find the Patches building. I'm not sure if it's still there. I couldn't find it. I didn't have that much time. But where airborne has these big towers that they drop you out of. There was a one story building there, and it had all the patches of the jump units. That's why it was called the Patches building. I'm not sure if it's still there, but many of the listeners are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So my girlfriend at the time, Jules, we jump in her little red Dodge Colt, and it's the middle. Graduation was over from airborne. Dudes are marching to RIP. We drive down to the Patches building, and I walk inside, and it's a building probably 8 times as big as this. Just not that big, but it was all these desks and everything. And there's one dude in the corner, and I come in, I say, "Hey, I'm looking for Mr. Buttersworth." And he says, "Oh, I'm Mr. Buttersworth. What can I do for you?" And I'm thinking, holy crap. Like, he's the only guy. Everyone else is at lunch or something. He's the only guy there. So I'm like, oh, lucky as hell. So I I run back to that corner. I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to be going to RIP. They're literally like marching by at the time. I'm like, hey, something is wrong. My orders didn't, and someone told me that you could fix it. And he says, ooh, you think you got what it takes to be a ranger? I don't have a very good Southern accent, but he's got that Southern. I mean, this guy looked like that prototypical, just pain in the ass Southerner. Really pasty white skin. Just kind of soft, like the plantation owner. You know what I mean? He had everything but the stupid hat. And the guy looked to be my age at the time. He looked to be like in his 50s or something. And I said, I don't know, man. I said, I don't know if I have what it takes to be a ranger. I think that's what RIP is all about. And he kind of looks at me and he says, you might have what it takes to be a ranger. And I'm just like, I tell you what, you can beat me in an arm wrestle. I'll go ahead and cut you orders to go be a ranger. And I'm like, what? He's like, come on, Ranger, you look strong. So I'm freaking out, right? Like I've got orders to go to somewhere, and my again, this idea of a dream of being a ranger or being a man enough to become a ranger. So he clears stuff off of his desk, okay, and he puts his arm up, and we arm wrestle. I'm a 18-year-old kid. I think I was 18 at the time. Joined at 17, turned 18. He's like, oh, you're pretty strong. Let's go 2 out of 3. And I'm like, boom, you know what I mean? And he's like, oh, again, that's pretty good. He's like, do you wrestle? And I was like, I wrestled in high school. Yeah. He's like, I'll tell you what, if you can pin me, I'll go ahead and cut you orders to go be a ranger. And I'm just like, what in the world? So we're rearranging furniture. It'd be like having a wrestling match in here. So we're like, it's desks and and it's all, again, the old timers that are listening to this, it's all that old World War II furniture. It's metal with the green pad and the metal World War II fan that's like, you know what I mean? We're pushing all this crap away, and he makes a little bit of space, and he says, you want to be on top or bottom? Like the wrestling stance where one guy's on all fours, And I was like, I don't know the top, So he's like, okay, and we start wrestling, and I turn him over and I pin him, and he's like, oh, you're pretty good. He's like, how again? I gotta insist on 2 out of 3. If you can pin me 2 out of 3, I'll cut you some orders to go be a ranger. And I'm just like, let's do it. You know what I mean? So I'm in the middle of this trying to get this second pin in, right? And all of a sudden, and I can only describe it, and I don't know if this is PC anymore, all I can describe is suddenly my gaydar goes off. And this guy, I'm like rolling him over to pin him, and he's like, and then it's like everything starts to come. I'm so panicky about not being able to become a ranger. I'm not really, you might have read the signals early on. I've told this story and people are like, how did you not see it? I was like, I didn't see it until I felt his dick on my leg. Okay. Like suddenly I'm like, what is happening? And he's like, And I push him off and I stand up and he's getting himself and dusting himself off. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? Cause I'm still confused, And he sits down in a chair and he says, you wouldn't hit me. And I was like, the hell I won't. And he's kind of kitty corner from this desk. And I reach over the desk and I punch him. And I remember it clear as day. I punch him in the mouth and he flips back in the chair. It's a chair. The chair is on wheels, one of those desk chairs, and it flips back and I'm over him and his lip is split and he's got like a little bit of blood, pouring in, just kind of trickling into his mouth. And I said, he said something like, he's like, ooh, I think you got what it takes to be a ranger. And I'm like, dude, I think I called him a name. And he's like, you go ahead now. Your orders will follow. And I said, they better. I said, if I come back here, I'm going to whoop your ass. And he's like, you go ahead now, Ranger. And I come out. I'd taken my uniform off. I was just in a t-shirt, you know what I mean? And I come walking out. This whole thing took like 10, 15 minutes. Like it took longer than I'm able to tell the story, right? I'm soaked with sweat because this is Georgia, the Georgia heat. And I walk out and my wife is waiting in the car and I'm soaked with sweat. And she says, what happened? And I was like, I don't want to talk about it. Let's just go. Just take me over to Rip. So she drives me over to Rip, which was maybe a 3-minute drive. And we get there and I get out and the cadre yells, "Are you Tiegs?" And I'm like, "Roger that, Sarn." He's like, "Get over here." So I run in. So Mr. Buttersworth had made that call in that interim. And then that was the rest of the story. Almost. So this is 1987, 1988, right? So now I've told this story over and over and over. And some people are like, bullshit. I'm like, whatever. You don't have to believe it. I'm telling the story now. And I don't know the guy's name. I know it now. And here's why. I'm standing, it's called Building 4, which is it's the officer building, not officer building, but it's the training building where all the infantry officers go through. So now it's 1997. Okay, I'm a second lieutenant, and I'm going through officer training at Fort Benning, and I'm in Building 4, and I'm telling this story about this Southern gentleman who I had to wrestle to get my Ranger contract. And there's a bunch of dudes, and we're all standing there, and I'm telling the story, and he walks past, and I said, "That's the guy." It's like that's the guy. And a bunch of them turn around and they're like, "Oh, that's Mr. Buttersworth. Yeah, he's," again, I don't know if this is a PC anymore. "He's queer as a $3 bill. He wrestles everybody." And I had this Me Too movement sense of like relief and disgust because I was like, "Oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who got molested by this old man." But then it was the other thing was like, and nobody cares? How does he get away with it? So he walks by, and then I get to know his name. And at this point now, 10 years later, he has been promoted. He's in charge of officer records at Fort Benning, So he's just now this staple of Fort Benning and the infantry officers course, where we were talking a little bit about jujitsu. It's where jujitsu was just getting introduced. The modern combatives was just getting introduced. So a couple times a week at Fort Benning in the training course, we would go and have a modern combative session. We would do jujitsu, and we do it in uniform. And this dude would show up, and he would show up in his, in the old gray sweatpants and like a white T-shirt, no underpants on, dude. And you want to know why I knew there were no underpants? Because I could see the twigs and berries. Like it was very clear if he was hanging left or right. So he's in there doing jujitsu with all these infantry officers, and I would stand here on the sidelines at this level of voice. "This doesn't bother anyone. This old man rubbing his dick on all of us, like this. No one else sees what I'm seeing." And he's down there rolling. He's just like, you know what I mean? And I was like, what is happening? Like no one else is bothered by this. I did that probably 5 times in the course of seeing this guy. Story's almost over. Not quite. So I'm going through the officer course, and I win something, and I get awarded Pathfinder School. And I want to get to Fort Lewis to go to the 2nd Ranger Battalion, where I'm going to go work as a lieutenant. And my wife Jules is pregnant with our son, and I need to get there. His birthday is in November, so this is the late summer or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but I needed to get to Fort. I didn't have time to do Pathfinder School. Was my point. Pathfinder School was like 6 weeks long or 8 weeks long or whatever it was, and I was like, dude, I know I was awarded this. I don't want it. Give it to someone else. I need to get up to Fort Lewis and get settled because my wife is going to have a baby, and we want to have all that put together. And I'd been talking about that for months, and I was going to talk to Mr. Buttersworth about this stuff. And I never brought up our previous history, other than like pointing out the open molestation that was happening during Army combatives. Well, now it's the day we graduate from the infantry officer basic course, and we're ready to move. Like literally the movers are at our house. And I go in to see him, and he's supposed to have my orders amended. So not go to Pathfinder school, go directly to 2nd Ranger Battalion. And they're not done. So I'm in his office, and I look around, and I shut the door, and I call him by his first name. And I said, "Do you remember me from a few years ago?" And he said, "Oh, I remember you, Ranger." I said, "Okay, I'm going to come back after lunch. And if you don't have my orders straight, that ass whooping that I threatened you with 10 years ago is going to come. I don't understand what's going on, but get my shit straight." You know, which was a risk. You know what I mean? But pretty, not the appropriate thing to do. And he's like, "You go ahead, Ranger. You come back after lunch. Your orders will be here." So I go back and I go get something to eat with my wife, who's extremely pregnant. And I come back to his office after lunch, and he wasn't there, but my orders were sitting front and center on his desk to go to Fort Lewis. And then that ended my experience with Mr. Buttersworth. Is that bizarre?
That's fucking wild. But come take my back now, Jeffrey. It's a little hot in here. Why don't you take your shirt off?
Yeah. When someone says, "How bad did you want it?" I'll tell you how bad I wanted it. I let myself get sexually molested so I could be a Ranger. Yeah.
Whatever it takes, baby.
Yeah, and there's plenty of dudes out there now that have similar stories where like he challenged them to basketball or wrestling or something it just became like his MO, But yeah. So that's how I got broken in to the and then on top of that, so Jules is sitting there, we're getting smoked. And we were supposed to have a 4-day weekend. Like that was, you graduate from airborne school. We were told you were going to go in process, have the weekend with your families. There's all sorts of families there. So I'll never forget it. We're in Red Square getting smoked. You know what I mean? And there's like families around. There's like RVs and things because people had like weekends planned, and they're just smoking the daylights out of us. And I remember my Jules is sitting, cute little 18-year-old girl, tan, sitting on the Dodge Colt, and I can see her kind of in the corner of my eye, and they're smoking us. And one of the sergeants who I later got to know, a Sergeant Shot. Again, he's a Ranger legend. People know Sergeant Shot. Sergeant Shot comes up to Jules and says, "Hey, little lady, can I help you?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm waiting for my boyfriend. They're supposed to have the weekend off." He's like, "Oh no, there's only one way he gets the weekend off, and that's if he quits. So if he ain't gonna quit, I suggest you go home now." And she's like, "Hey, I got all of his stuff in the car. Can at least he come and get it?" And the guy said, "Yeah." So I ran over there, and it was just frantic, like get my stuff and leave. So that was Jules' first experience with the Army, was just basically recognizing it doesn't always go as planned. And then the second experience with the Army, so I make it through RIP, I get to Hunter Army Airfield, and whatever happened, we get a weekend, right? And we grew up together outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we met each other when we were like 15 years old. In this little Dodge Colt. I've got two more stories with a Dodge Colt. So we worked together. We met at work. We went to different schools, but we met. I was a busing guy. What do you call that guy? I bus tables. Busboy. Yeah, I was a busboy, and she was a salad girl, worked in the kitchen, and that's how we got to know each other. And then her family just coincidentally relocated to Charlotte the same year that I joined the military. So we were just close enough to keep that long distance relationship. And one of the big things, because there's the Ranger tab that you get for Ranger school, and then there's the Ranger scroll, which is to be assigned to the regiment. And the Ranger tab is the school. I mean, they have this saying like the tab is a school, the scroll is a way of life. That's kind of how they say it. And if you showed up at battalion with a Ranger tab on something because you were a motivator or whatever, they would just dog the crap out of you. And then if you wanted to mess with the buddy, you would plant a Ranger tab in his kit, So I'm standing there with my team leader and my squad leader. the very first weekend that I'm seeing Jules now after this last encounter, which I don't know how many weeks it had been, and she drives up in that very same Dodge red Dodge Colt, which I don't know if you probably don't even, it's just this tiny little hatchback car, and I see her driving up, and I can see through the windshield that she has a decal of a Ranger tab on the back of her car, like this big. And she drives by, and I'm standing there, and she drives by, and she's looking for me, and she sees me, and she waves. Yeah. And I see it, and I turn around, and I just start walking. Like I disowned her like Judas, like Peter. I denied her immediately. So she's waving. I look at her, eyes wide open, and I turn around and I start walking. And I'm praying to God that my team leader and my squad leader don't see that Ranger tab. And I just start walking at double time. And she gets out of the car and she starts yelling, Jeff, I'm here. And dude, I pretend like I don't know her at all. And then I run her. She's confused. I run around the barracks and come back around. And I'm like, Jules, what is that decal? She's like, oh, I thought it was cute. I found it at an army surplus store. You know what I mean? And I'm immediately like scraping that thing off. So then I had to explain to her, you want me to get my ass kicked? Like, do not say that. Yeah.
So that was your and Jules' first taste of the needs of the military.
Yeah. Let me tell you one more story on the Dodge Colt. So Dodge Colt, I get to know Jules. I went to a private school, went to a private Christian school, and like I was saying, faith was never like a question to me. It was always a fact. The Bible's real. The Bible stories are real. Creation happened. The flood happened. Jesus happened. You know what I mean? All these things. It was just very factual to me all through my life, and to this day, it's just very factual to me. Even if some of the details have been embellished or some of it is myth and legend, like it doesn't really matter to me. It's just it's an account of history that's very meaningful. And that's just kind of the way it was when I went to school. We had religious studies and we had chapel services, and it was just ingrained in my life. And Jules was one of the first people that I really got to know deeply who didn't have a faith tradition, and I remember talking to her about Jesus and Moses and all this, and her family is Jewish ethnicity. They're secular Jews. They came from Eastern Europe before and around the Holocaust. And some of her ancestors were religious Jews, but many of them were just ethnically Jews. You know what I mean? And so she didn't really understand the Jewish faith, and she knew very little about the Christian faith. And I'm talking to her, and she's like, so like you're saying Moses was real and like Jesus was like, these were real people? And I'm shocked because here's this beautiful little girl who I'm falling in love with, who is a better person than me. She's more honest. She's more caring. She's more gracious. She's more merciful. And she's not doing it because she's afraid of a vindictive God or that she's trying to follow. She's just doing it because that's what she thinks is right. And that absolutely fascinated me. So one night after work, we worked at a steak place called Jake's. After we ended work at Jake's, we went out in the car, her little red Dodge Colt, and we started talking. I think it started in the restaurant. We were cleaning up, but I started talking to her about the Bible and these Bible stories and some of these things that I write about 40 years later. And time goes by, and her dad shows up because he's expecting her home from work. So it was winter in Wisconsin, and the windows are all fogged up, and her dad drives up, and we're sitting there talking literally about the Bible, literally about the Bible, but it definitely doesn't look like, because we're the one car at the Jake's parking lot in the corner, you know what I mean? It wasn't a rockin'. That was the only thing I could say. The Dodge Colt wasn't a rockin'. It was sitting still, and it's a knock at the window, and Jules rolls it down, and it's her dad. And that's how I met her dad. And he just says, Jules, you need to get home. And she's like, Dad, it's not what it's looked like. We were talking about Jesus, or we were talking about the Bible. And he's just like, you need to get home now. And he looks at me, and I'm just like, so that was my introduction to Mr. Peter Safer, Jules' dad.
That's great.
Yeah. So I still thinks thinks we were fooling around, but we weren't. That came a couple days later.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. It's one of the few times where it actually isn't what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, let's get into your first taste of combat in Panama in '89.
Yeah.
So for the younger viewers, can you just briefly kind of talk about who Noriega was and what that operation was about?
Mm-hmm. So what's interesting is, as a corporal in the Rangers, I had no idea, right? Like, I know after the fact, and it's almost, it's fascinating now looking back at things, because people see stuff and they're like, oh, this is the start of World War III, or you know what I mean? Like, because information moves at such a fast rate, and it could be like Putin invading Ukraine could be the start of World War III. What's happening between Iran and Israel right now could be the start of World War III. But there's a whole lot of other ingredients that have to happen. As a Ranger corporal, I had 4 dudes that I was responsible for, a team leader, and that's what I was focused on. So I was not looking at the geopolitical situation at all. But to answer your question, Manuel Noriega had been allied with the United States. So, this was all still throwback from the Cold War. So when World War II ended, the world kind of split itself. Are we going to ally ourselves with the Soviet Union, or are we going to ally ourselves with the United States? And what's fascinating is we're still feeling the repercussions of that. And it's really interesting. And if somebody wants to know, so let's just simplify it. Those that allied with the Soviet Union, they're the bad guys, okay? The ones that allied with the United States, they're the good guys. Let's just keep it that simple. So if you want to know who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, it's really quite simple today. What are they carrying in their hands? Anyone who's carrying an AK-47 is a bad guy, because they were supplied by the Soviet Union. So you can go to any country in the world, and if they're carrying M16s or AR-15s or American-style munitions, they were on our side. If they're carrying AK-47s, they're on the other side. Now that isn't 100% true today. It was pretty much 100% true in the 80s and 90s. So even go through the complexities of the Middle East. Jordan, M16s. Syria, AK-47s. Iraq, AK-47s. Kuwait, M16s. You know what I mean? Like, even in Central America, you can see who carried what. So even today, when we talk about even like the Axis, you've got Iran and Syria and Turkey and North Korea. They're like the bullies on the block, and Russia. That's all still throwback from the Cold War. It's still resonating through our current day. So I had no idea of any of that, back in 1988, 1989. But Noriega had allied himself with the United States, and we had all those jungle conflicts in the 70s and 80s, as with Vietnam, and who was going to become communist, who was going to be, and we were, you had Cuba mixed into all that. So we were friendly with Noriega, and then he started to play both sides, and he began to build this narco terror network, and he began to blackmail the United States, and he began to basically play both sides. And the U.S. basically said, "Hey, man, get back into the lines, start coloring back in the lines, or we're going to depose you." And he called our bluff. And the first George Bush, who was the director of the CIA, which people don't really think about. So there's a long history between the first George Bush and even what was happening here. He said, "Call my bluff. I'm gonna go down and do this." So 1983 was a the last time the U.S. had been in combat. That was when they went into Grenada to recover these medical students. So there was a conflict then. Again, it was the old communist thing between Cuba and the who was aligning with whom. And that so those Grenada Raiders, we called them. There were a few of them left, and we honored the fallen from Grenada. I came in 87, 88, so it wasn't that long after. But war was kind of a distant memory. Vietnam was really the last thing. So we started training up for Panama the day I got to battalion. We did a lot of jungle training. So we were back and forth through Panama. They had the jungle training school there. I think I went to that thing like 4 times. Awesome school. But we were always training in the jungle in that type of an environment. Didn't really think anything of it. It just was what it was. And then our training became more and more complex where, it's platoon, company, battalion. Now you've got all the battalions and you've got rotary wing and you've got fixed wing and things, So we did this giant mock-up down in Eglin Air Force Base right before Christmas. And 2nd Battalion jumped in, 1st and 3rd Battalion jumped in. Everybody was there to play. And I just understood it as the escalation of training. Again, I saw my team lead responsibility as what can my guys do individually, what can they do collectively, and that collective training, elevated until we get to the point where the higher level leadership is putting all of it together, So we have this huge training event down at Eglin Air Force Base, and then we go home. And I again, my timing may be a little bit off, but let's say we finish on a Thursday, we get back to Savannah, we clean up on that Friday, and now we're supposed to go on block leave that following Monday. And with the 3 Ranger battalions and the alert cycle that we needed to be on, you only got Christmas vacation once every 3 years. This 1st battalion, you know what I mean? Because the other 2 battalions were on different levels of alert. So this was 1st Battalion's chance to go home and have Christmas. And it was also the time that Jules and I were going to get married. So we actually, like every good NCO back then, because we didn't make any money, we got married by a Justice of the Peace in April of that year, April of 89. So we just celebrated a 35-year anniversary. Pause for applause. Thank you. So April of 89, we got married. It was very, very low key. It was just Jules and I and a Justice of the Peace. And then you save money to have your wedding. That's how everybody did it that way. You'd get married. As soon as you get married, Uncle Sam gives you a little bit more money. So we'd save our money. And we had a wedding planned for December 22nd, I believe, December 22nd of 1989 back in Milwaukee, because that's where my family was. That's where many of her friends were still, So I'm not in a million years thinking anything is happening. We come in, we clean up, we literally have our bags packed to go into work Monday morning, sign out on leave, and then go to Milwaukee. The Simpsons Christmas special is on, which was a big event. Again, back then, we had cable TV, but it wasn't like it is today, right? Like people talk about how many folks watched MASH or watched Cheers, or it's like, well, yeah, we didn't have many options. Like the entire world was watching the Simpsons Christmas special. So we sit down to watch the Simpsons Christmas special, and the phone rings, and it's my squad leader who gives me the alert notification, which means I call the next guy and the next guy and the next guy, and we all need to go into work. And it's the notification is, this is not training. This is a real world event. So I tell Jules, I was like, I don't know what's going on, but it's real world. I'll call you when I call you, and pack up my stuff, and I go in, drive into work, and you come into work, and the MPs are out, and the base is locked down, and you come into work, and the payphones are all disassembled. They're all like hanging, taken apart, and they're like, okay, this is real world. Stand by. We're wheels up in 12 hours or whatever. So we're getting, we're rigging our stuff. We have no idea where we're going or what we're doing. But you're ready. You're getting all your stuff put together. And then this was a Sunday night. Monday, nothing happens. Somewhere along the line, I believe on Monday, we're watching TV, and CNN reports that the 82nd Airborne and the U.S. Army Rangers are preparing to invade Panama. And I'm like, oh, I guess we know where we're going now, So what I find interesting is even though the world is a much more connected place, it's really quite similar. And again, that sticks out in my mind because we were getting so it hit the news, and then it started talking more and more, like the news, like that's all it was. And we were getting reports now of what was happening in Panama. They didn't know we were coming. Well, now they know we're coming. They suspect, you know what I mean? So it's like as the news was talking about it, I'm a corporal. What am I, 20 years old now? I'm a 20-year-old corporal thinking, does CNN and the news stations have no respect for like me? Like now they know we're coming. They're reinforcing their airfield. Noriega's on the run. You know what I mean? Like it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm completely perplexed. And do these journalists know the danger that they're putting us in? Like do they? Surely they must know. And now I can look you in the eyes. X number of years later, they know and they don't care. And I still find every step of the way, we've had journalists put us in great risk to have the story. So I've come to accept that that's part of the job. I resent that part of the job, but I understand it. But that was my first taste of it. So we're getting amped up. We're not sure, what we're going to do in all of this. We understand what it is, and we have our jobs. And it became more and more real as time went on. And it really became real when we all went down to the airfield, and each job position you had, if you were a team leader, if you were a sniper, if you were a mortar guy, if you were a machine gunner, they had these pallets with sandbags filled with stuff. And they said, hey, this is the machine gun kit. This is this. So you went to the pallet that your job description was, and all your toys were in that sandbag. So if you were a machine gunner, and what they had done was, even though I was a corporal team leader, I had my stuff. I had like smoke grenades for signaling. I had flares for signaling, but I also had a couple mortars that I had to carry. I had a couple rounds of belts for the machine gun that I had to carry. They had it all kind of divvied out. I was also a sniper, so I had sniper rounds and all that. And as you went and grabbed stuff, we're pulling stuff out. Like, what is this? It's like, oh, this is a mini. I think they were. Oh, this is a mini Belgian grenade, And we're like, well, how does it work? And they're like, oh, just like everything else, just pull the pin. We're like, well, what's the delay? And they're like, we're not. You know what I mean? Like, we're not sure. Or what's this? This is a concussion grenade. This is a. So they were giving us stuff that we had never seen before, and I'm thinking, this is insane. Like I'm supposed to pull the pin and throw this grenade, and I have no idea like what the fuse is on it. So we're kind of like asking, like, hey, Sergeant, can we throw a couple of these and at least like time the fuse on it?
Like, I just don't cook it off at all.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. Don't cook it. That was the answer. Don't cook it off. Well, because like, what are we gonna do? It's pouring rain. Everyone's assembly. We're getting ready to go. Like, what are we gonna? Hey, everybody, don't mind the explosions in the corner. Yeah, that really was. Don't cook it off. It's like, oh, okay.
And for people listening, that means when you pull the pin, there's a delay in when the actual grenade goes off, right?
Yeah. Give or take a 5-second delay. Let the spoon fly. 1, 2, 3, chuck it. And then it blows up when you want it to blow up. Yeah. So exactly. 1, 2, boom. Well, that goes. I don't even remember. I think the fuse was about the same. But that was basically the rules. Was don't cook it off. And then, because I was a sniper, I had special rounds for my platoon weapon was an accurized M16A2. So it was the regular assault weapon that everyone used, but it had a carbon inlay, so it fit tighter, the bolt and the extractor or the bolt and the charging handle were like a little heavier, and then it had a scope optic on it. So I was the platoon sharpshooter, so to speak. I was the platoon, I was that was part of my job as the corporal team leader. And then I had the M24 sniper rifle. So we had just switched over from the M21, which was the accurized M14, to this M24, which was a Remington 300. And it was I had a different weapon system that was going to get air land. So I was going to jump in with my accurized uh, M16, and then once the airfield was secure, and if I needed to move out on any sniper missions, I would then link up with my sniper rifle and go do the sniper work. But I wasn't jumping in with that. But I was jumping in with the rounds. And then I like to tell this story because I had a calculator to compute the winds and mills and things like that. So a long range shot, you're not figuring it out in your head. I'm calculating all the hold off and all that kind of stuff. So I had this tiny little solar powered calculator, and there was the demo bag with all the demolitions, the C4 and the time fuse and the all that stuff. And like we didn't know who to give it to. So we're like, who's the demo guy? Who's carrying the demo? And somebody was like, well, Tiegs has a calculator, so he might as well. Because again, to calculate how much demo you need. So if you, depending on what you're blowing up, there's all these formulas like, what am I, how much C4 do I need? All this kind of stuff. So the logic was, Tiegs has a calculator because he's a sniper. So he's also the demo guy. So, so I remember being like, hey, dudes, that's fine. But like, I can't carry all this stuff. Like, somebody take these mortars, somebody take these, it was M60, it wasn't the 240. Take these machine gun rounds, because now I got this pack of demo, but it's funny because this goes back to what you were saying was the professional level. We were a professional army, but we were not professional like we are today. And there's a number of reasons for that. And again, one of the biggies obviously is the wars, right? You become a professional very fast. So that was the gear. It was heavy as hell. I mean, all we had was, I think we had a poncho liner, a poncho, water, maybe an MRE, and then it was just ammo and explosives and marking devices, and the rucks were super, super heavy. And then we loaded up, and it was time to jump into Panama. The flight wasn't very long because I think a bunch of us convened at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, and then I'm not sure, probably 3rd Battalion left from Georgia, but we all kind of left and met in the air en route. And then I remember because it was raining in Georgia, we were soaking wet, and the plane, it gets cold. You're up at altitude, and there's it's not so you're sitting on that metal floor, and I remember like shaking, and like, even when you're cold and wet and shaking, it starts to feel like anxiety, just like we were talking about before, where it's like, I don't, is TBI PTS or is PTS TBI? It's kind of like cold shaking induces anxiety, and I remember sitting there in the aircraft, and I'm shaking, and I'm like, am I afraid? Like, am I anxious? And I conclude, no, I'm not afraid at all. My body is like, it's cold, and then when they open the doors, the jump doors, and that warm Caribbean air comes in, it really reinforced, like, oh, I'm not afraid at all. Like, it's that warm air feels good. And because the aircraft was taking fire, and they just jarring left and right. It was like terrible turbulence. You know what I mean? It's what if, and everyone's getting jostled around, and I have terrible motion sickness. So it was like, once the door opened and that warm air came in and we were lined up to jump, I just couldn't wait to get out of that aircraft. And then what I remember, people were falling down, and we didn't think, I had no idea that anyone had gotten shot in the aircraft, because it's loud, you don't hear anything, you don't really see anything dramatic, but guys that were falling down, you were just stepping over them, and I just remember thinking, man, this is the most disorganized jump I've ever seen. Because, static lines are everywhere and the safeties are trying to pull them in and there's guys laying down and, and all this. And you find out later that, guys got hit in the aircraft and, just with the jostling, people are falling down, slipping on puke because it was just the turbulence. So I remember jumping out and seeing an A-10 like right there and thinking, holy crap, what is that? And then the chute opens up and I check the chute and I look down and I'm confused because I see tracers. I see red and green tracers flying all over the place. And I don't recognize the objective. We had trained in Eglin Air Force Base with all these mock-ups, but the mock-ups, it's like assemble, it's like, hey, this is this, it was way smaller than what it actually was. I mean, an actual airplane hangar was like a 10 by 10 little mock-up, So I'm flying in, I'm seeing these tracers, trying to remember what color are ours, who's shooting at whom. Like it's just ricochet, like, are they shooting at me? Because they were shooting at us, the jumpers, but a lot of it was just ricochets flying all over the place. And then even like the buildings, I'm like, where am I? And then I finally because it was very, very short amount of time before you hit. We were jumping from so low. I think I finally see something where I'm like, oh, that's where I need to go. And then you crash into the ground. And I remember guys talking about this where if your chute landed anywhere near the runway, you had to pull it off the runway because that could get wound up because we're securing an airfield so you can land aircraft. So you had the jump clearing team so you jump in. Some guys would start to work the assault, and the clearing team would now on motorcycles and vehicles ride up and down the runway to clear the runway, make sure that people could land. You know what I mean? They had little bulldozers that would get dropped so you could bulldoze shit off the drop zone. Because again, the Panamanians knew we were coming. There was all sorts of obstacles and crap on the drop zone. They had blown potholes and stuff to try to make it so you couldn't use the airfield. My job was to get a foothold and assault. I was not on the clearing team side of it. So you land and I don't remember what I did or not. Because some guys were like, because you have your weapon is in a case. It's called an M1950. So it's this big canvas case that your weapon's in. You can't get to your weapon. And some guys were like, I'm cutting that stuff out immediately. I'm cutting out and getting to my weapon as soon as I can. I remember, the same guy who's like, don't cook off the hand grenade was like, they're like, don't cut yourself out of your jump shit. Like you'll be fine. Like don't. You got plenty of time. So I don't think I cut myself out of my gear. But when you hit, you're immediately getting your weapon into play. You know what I mean? And the thing that I also remember was I was near enough to the drop zone. Like I landed in some really tall, like elephant grass, but the drop zone wasn't that far away. So I was like, oh, I better stuff my chute into the kit bag just in case it blows over there, So I got my weapon out and it's loud, but it's not, like the loudness is all around you. You know what I mean? The AC-130 gunship is burning stuff down and the A-10s are dropping bombs and there's gunfights around. But yet where you are, it's like eerily quiet, right?
Mhm.
Like there it's just you're all alone, and I think that's a common thing for any combat paratrooper. Is like when you hit the ground, you're all alone, and in the dark, you don't have to be that alone to feel alone, right? Like if you can't hear or see anybody, it feels like you're alone. And I got out of my stuff and I start pulling in my chute so I can stuff it in my kit bag. And there's something in the elephant grass over there, and I stop and I get out my I'm kind of I think I'm the challenge password was or the running password was bulldog. So and I don't remember what the challenge password was. You don't challenge a password. So let's say the challenge and password. The running password is when you're doing something in the dark, and I'm getting close to friendlies. Like as I'm moving, I'm saying bulldog, bulldog. and then you're like, Bulldog, because
Okay.
you know I'm a good guy. Again, this is 1989, dude. None of us have nods.
Right.
You know what I mean? A couple of us have radios. It's very, very rustic compared to what it is today. And I don't know what the challenge password was, but let's say I hear you, I can say Bulldog, and you can come back with Bulldog, or I would say, you know, Lightning. You come back with Thunder. Like it's a challenge password. Again, it's ancient, ancient. It's biblical.
Mhm.
You know, even in the Bible they talk about, it's called a shibboleth. Shibboleth. So even in the Bible, there's a story of a challenge and password when these guys are crossing the river, and they use the word shibboleth because the enemy couldn't say the word shibboleth without sounding, so that, again, as a young corporal, you didn't understand that one of the points of the challenge and password or the running password was because your enemy would have an accent with it.
Yeah.
But that in the best case scenario, that's the way it's designed to be. So even back in the biblical times, there was this challenge and password because you didn't know who was who in the dark, right? So I'm pulling this thing, I'm pulling my chute in, and I hear this, and I challenge password, nothing. I pull my and then finally I realize when I landed, so I land like here, and when my chute came down, it like looped around me. So I'm pulling my chute this way, and the end of it is over here, and I'm scaring the shit out of myself, thinking that every time I pull my chute, somebody's sneaking up on me. I'm like, what the fuck, you know? So I spend a little bit of time like figuring out because again, I'm not, I'm not the smartest monkey, but I'm not the dumbest monkey. It's like every time I do this, they move. You know what I mean? So I finally figure it out, and I run to the assembly area, and I think I wasted all sorts of time. And again, it's this idea of, oh, you missed the gunfight. Like we didn't expect it to last long. We weren't sure how long it was going to last. We were so dead set on cutting our teeth in battle, that I was afraid I was going to get there late. And my job was to get to the assembly area, and assemble a team's worth of guys, five guys with a machine gun team, and go get that foothold. It didn't have to be my guys. I was hoping it was going to be my guys, and as luck would have it, it mostly was my team that I was working with. And I was kind of the senior guy that got there. So as soon as my guys got to the assembly area, we moved out, and game on.
So war can be very confusing and
Yeah.
chaotic. Did you find that did it get less confusing and less chaotic by the time that you were a seasoned operator at the unit, or does that just have a constant no matter the timeline?
It's a good question. Really good question. And I'm going to go back to what we were talking about with this idea of flow. It never felt chaotic and confusing to me. That jump piece did, but after that, once we were on the ground and we were moving, it felt like I was in control. It felt like I knew what was happening. It felt like I understood. So there still was a level of confusion, kind of as you went like these concentric circles. I didn't know until 10 years later, in 1999, when I was a lieutenant at 2nd Ranger Battalion, I went to a anniversary thing about Panama. That was when I learned more about Noriega and why we had done what we had done, and what other elements were in play. That Delta Force was on the ground recovering Kurt Muse and hitting strategic targets, and there were special forces teams on the ground blowing bridges. I knew the SEALs had come in because, jumping ahead a bit in the story, we had gone in as a QRF to relieve and recover the SEALs that got pinned down on Patia Airfield. So I didn't know it until I got called to say, hey, get your squad, you're going in as a QRF. So I didn't understand that. And interestingly, I didn't understand until I was a lieutenant 10 years later, seeing a brief at an anniversary meeting, that we were even on two sides of Panama. Tacuman Airfield, where I jumped in, is on one side of Panama. I don't remember which, the east or west. And Rio Hato airfield that the other battalion jumped into, I thought they were right next to each other. Because when we trained in Eglin Air Force Base, they were right next to each other. So even when I'm jumping from an aircraft and I'm hearing this fight going on, I'm thinking that that's 2nd Battalion at Rio Hato. No, it was just another company. 2nd Battalion was miles and miles and miles away on the other side of the country. I didn't know that for 10 years because my job was to get that foothold, and fight at the very, very simple tactical level with my dudes. But I never felt it was all that chaotic. And in fact, almost the opposite. I didn't see it so much as, and what I was able to do or my team was able to do, I was actually impressed on what the Ranger unit was able to do. Because you get these people that tell you, you guys are the best of the best, and you can do this and you can do that. And I believed it, but I always took it with a grain of salt because there's danger in thinking you're something you're not, right? And we'll definitely come back to that. But seeing the unit in warfare where you've got things you've never seen before in a 3D capacity, and how we didn't hurt each other, you know what I mean? How we kept each other safe. We didn't have fratricide, and we rapidly overran and destroyed the Panamanian Defense Forces and tracked down Noriega. I was actually impressed. I was like, oh, this isn't just people being braggadocio, or people, building you up because it's part of what you need as a young man to go to combat. Like, this is legit. This is pretty interesting.
Did you engage anybody in Panama?
Yeah. So I write about it in my book. The very first thing that I recall was, and I'm pretty sure this was first because this would make sense to be first. Was yeah, I'm pretty sure this was first because we needed to gain a foothold, and there was a building that we needed to secure. We needed to get inside this building and begin clearing it, and we were responsible for clearing the barracks. So we needed to pin down the Panamanian Defense Forces so they couldn't reinforce the airfield, and then clear the barracks, and kill anyone that resisted, capture anyone that was ready to give up. And before we got to the barracks, there was this guard shack, and it's cement guard shack. It's completely typical of what you see. It's still like that in Central America. You know what I mean? The cheap cement with the little red clay roof on it. And we start maneuvering up on that thing, and so there's the road, and we're kind of in a, like a regular. There's kind of ditches on each side, and we're all kind of anchored on one side. And then the machine gun is on the other side of the ditch, and we're kind of maneuvering up on this guard shack, and all of a sudden, a little pistol. It was like a snub nose 38. The dude, we see a hand come up, and he starts like he pull, the snub nose 38, and I'm looking at that because it's all lit up. It's a guard shack with the arms to control traffic, and I'm thinking, does this guy have any idea what's happening? Like, dude, there's a squad of Rangers coming after you with a machine gun. Like, what do you think you're gonna do with a revolver snub nose 38? But he boom, boom, boom. And then it stops, and we continue to advance. And then an M16, because again, Panama was our friends. They're not AK-47 guys, and he just starts spraying. So now it's like, okay, this guy voted. He's done. So we start engaging, and I yell at my squad automatic weapon gunner, M249 machine gun, and I say, "Hey man, get suppressive fire down on that thing. We're gonna bound around." And he shoots up. He's shooting up high above the guard shack, and I'm yelling, "Bring your fire down! Bring your fire down!" And he brings it down onto the roof. I'm like, "Bring your fire down! Bring your fire down!" And it doesn't ever like get lower than the roof. So I switch over. So his name was Hale. I switch over to Ray. I say, "Ray, finish this." He has a M203 grenade launcher. And Ranger Ray from Moultrie, Georgia, that dude was a really good soldier, and he was a sniper with that M203. So he drops a round right in the guard shack. Not easy to do. He drops it right into the guard shack. Boom, it goes off, and then we assault through. And we get to the guard shack, and the team leader is in the lead. So me and a couple guys behind. We turn to look at the guard shack, and the dude's not there. The 380 is laying on the ground. The M16 is like in pieces because of the 203 had broken it up. And I'm like, where the hell did he go? And I turn to look, and he's lying in the grass. Like if he still would have held on or whatever, I mean, so I turn, and he's lying in the grass. And he's from me to you away. I just didn't see him in the dark. And he's lying down facing that way. And I can smell that he wet himself and crapped his pants. And he's wearing a t-shirt and like some loose, I think they were fatigue pants. And I think he had flip-flops on. So, he was not the guy like dressed to guard, to be in that guard shack. He probably, I don't know what it was. Anyway, I remember being angry, and I flip around, and I remember like being angry that, and this dude could have killed me. Like, he's facing the wrong way, but man, he got the jump on me. And he turns around. He's on his back facing away, and he kind of turns around and looks at me, and I turn my weapon on him, and dude, again, this is one of those memories that's so vivid. I'm flipping my selector lever from safe to fire, and I'm beginning to squeeze the trigger, thinking in my head, where do I shoot him? Like he's because it's his. Our targets, you don't shoot the backs. We don't have targets with backs. We have targets with fronts, right? Like you shoot their front, but his back is to me, and he's turning it. So I'm thinking, like, do I shoot him in the face? Do I shoot him in the back? Where's the right place to shoot this guy? And I've described this before. It's almost like I had a good angel and a bad angel on my shoulder, and I'm trying to figure out, like, what's the right place to shoot this guy? This is weird. I've never shot someone in the back before. I've never shot anyone, period, but target wise, And this voice in my head is like, hey man, this dude is a non-combatant. Like, clearly he's afraid for his life, And the bad angel's like, this is the same dude that just threw rounds at you guys. You know what I mean? And the good angel's like, is it though? And the bad angel's like, of course, look, like it's clear as day. It's the same guy, kill him. And the good angel is saying, take him captive. Don't kill him, And I remember this discussion in my head, dude. And the bad angel's like, this is war. This is war. He shot at you. It's time for him to die. And again, this is all happening in, you know what I mean? In that amount of time. And then finally, I very distinctly remember, like, the good angel saying, literally, the night is young. There'll be plenty of killing to do. And that, like, appealed to my logic. I was like, yeah, there'll be plenty of killing. This guy doesn't need to die. We'll capture him. So I hit him in the back of the head, and we cuff him, and he becomes our very first prisoner. And then that happened. And then, so we now bypassed that guard shack. We get to the building that we're supposed to get a foothold in. And again, we're very brute strength versus surgical capacity. We shoot a M203 through the door to breach the building. And again, not really thinking through the repercussions of that. We shoot a law, it breaches the door, dudes start running out of the building, and we start shooting the guys that are running from the building. Some of them armed, some of them not. But I bring it up because the first person I shot was like 5 of us did. You know what I mean? Like, they're running, and we're all like tracking and shooting and shooting and shooting, and then the guy drops, and and then you don't know, like, so even when you're in the room, you're shooting, it's happening so fast. So I guess I do have to backtrack a little bit on as far as the cast. I certainly didn't have the heightened awareness. So because there's so many of us, we're overwhelming them with force. 2 or 3 guys would shoot the same dude, So I would say the first half a dozen people that I ever shot, so did 5 or 6 other dudes. So it never had like that ownership. You know what I mean? Until I got sniper responsibilities, where like exactly who shot this guy. I did. Because no one else is supposed to, kind of a thing. But even all of it it felt very much like training. Other than that first piece where the guy had his back to me, all of the rest just really felt like we're shooting those targets. It's just that the targets are like they're hooking and jiving. You know what I mean? They're running left, running right, coming for you, coming against you. But the fighting went very fast. We threw a couple hand grenades, and those had the effect that we wanted. Um, and as we cleared those first few buildings, I think let's say maybe an hour later ish, we're just continuing to clear it, and all the dudes they're either gone or they're giving up. So we definitely felt the tide shift very, very rapidly. Um, and then we're clearing another barracks, and we go through a day room that I remember has a disco ball in it, and it has a bar, like just like day rooms. I don't know if we still have them anymore in the Army, but we did when I was in. And we stop and we fill up some of our water because they had a water faucet, and they had a fridge, and the fridge had like soda, and it was Christmas. It was the 22nd of December, so there was like ham and chicken and stuff, and guys stop, and we start eating, we start like shoving food in our mouths real quick, because we have a lull, and I see the phone, and I decide to call Jules, and to let her know, like, hey, I'm not going to be home. So I pick up the phone, and I call collect, 1-800-collect, for those people that don't know what that is. So I remember calling her. So we invaded, I think it was 2 or 3 in the morning. It's I guess there's the time zone. I don't remember exactly, but I call collect, and she answers, and she accepts. And I said, Jules, I said, I don't have a lot of time to talk now. You probably know where we are. I just need you to know I'm not going to be home for the wedding, because this is 20 December. The wedding was 22 December. So I said, hey, call my mom, and it's going to be postponed. I don't know how long I'm going to be, but I'm certainly not going to be back in the next day or two. Love you. Goodbye. So she calls my mom, and my mom does her best to cancel. Again, it's 1989. There's no email. You call as many people as you can. So we still had people show up at the church, not understanding. Because even back then, as a ranger, I don't think people necessarily knew I was a ranger. It was one of those things where you just didn't talk about it. We've talked about this at length about, do you say Delta Force and all these kinds of things. Well, even back then, you really didn't tell people you were a ranger. You know what I mean? Like, even that was something that was kind of hidden. So there were plenty of people that did not put 2 and 2 together, that what they just watched on the news, I would be at. So people came to the wedding, to the church. My mom had to turn them around. People came to the reception that my mom had to turn around. And then, I think it was 20 years later. Yeah. 20 years later, Jules and I finally had a little ceremony, and we did a renewal vows, when she turned 40, and we had I guess it was our 20-year anniversary. So she still had the dress. She had the wedding dress that she never wore. And she could still fit into it, but it just looked 80s. It looked like something Madonna would wear in a video. You know what I mean? Like, she put it on, and we were like, yeah. I mean, I guess people would understand. Like, it's kind of funny. It's kind of a cute idea, but it really looks kind of silly.
Yeah.
She looked like Paula Abdul or something like that. Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, it's funny. It's a good story. So, going back to the guy in the guard shack,
Yeah.
and you spared him, obviously.
Yeah.
And it seems like the right call. Just at face value to me right
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
meaning
Yeah.
meaning. But did that dilemma ever come up again where you spared somebody?
Yes, but not like that. Like again, that it takes me 3 minutes to explain what happened in my head. Um, it really became accelerated. You know, what I mean, where you'd make those decisions. There certainly were decisions that you're making. I've had plenty where you're select the lever off safe to fire, squeezing the trigger, and you make a different call. I had one event in Afghanistan. Um, that I actually jerked the weapon away. So w- we were doing the village. It was one of those things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Where like it's just a handful of us, and it'd be like, hey man, like we're gonna have to do the whole village. And what I mean by that is like the bad guys are so intermixed with the non-combatants that it's like you're gonna have to clear the entire village to find them. And it's gonna be a mess. And it was one of those where we were doing the village, and I was engaging somebody down this kind of road alleyway type thing, and this dude popped out, and I turned to shoot him, and he was an old man with the red, is it red or orange that they color their beards? I can't remember. It was daylight. Um, but I'm like boom, 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 and stuff's hitting, and stuff's hitting around me, and this dude just walks out, and I flip to him, and I yank the bullet like right at the last minute because this was all happening. So I yanked the gun, and I actually I remember it like two to three rounds right in the wall next to him, and this dude looks at it, and he just walks past me again. It's like this happens all the time. I was trying to explain this to some people, like, dude, war is very like isolated. Like the world happens around warfare. You know what I mean? Like one of the examples I was talking earlier about Portland and um, the riots and everything that happened in Portland. And I remember somebody said, "Oh, Portland is like a war zone," and the mayor was like, "No, Portland isn't like a war zone. You know, all of the violence is contained to these 2 or 3 blocks." And I was like, "Actually, dude, that's what war zones are like. Like, unless it's a complete war, like what's happening again with Russia and Ukraine and things. Like you're fighting in a block or two, and the rest of the world is going on about its business, and the markets are running, and the cabs are running, and even in the middle of a gunfight, if some little old lady decides she wants to cross the street, she crosses the street in the middle of. And again, I don't know what old boy was thinking. There's a gunfight going on, and he just turns the corner like nothing's happening and walks right past me. You know. Um, so that was the only time where I literally had to pull rounds away. Um, but you're just constantly training to make that distinction. And one of the biggest things that you train in CQB, close quarters battle, is seeing the hands. So it's interesting because you you train over and over and over, and they tell you to look at the hands, look at the hands, because that's the threat.
Mm.
What your face can be smiling or angry or whatever. You're not gonna hurt me with spit. You're not gonna give me an evil gaze. It's what's in your hands. So you can see the development of training, and even when I train people and I say, look at the hands, look at the hands, look at the hands. What you'll see is people start shooting hands.
Oh,
You know, so the hands will have a gun in it, or the hands, whatever. But you'll see the rounds are hitting the hands because you're training and you're looking to identify the hands. And even though I'm supposed to shoot you right here or right here, I'm shooting. You shoot the hands. So a telltale sign of when somebody's getting trained is you'll see the rounds move to their hands, and then the rounds move to where they're supposed to be, and guys are checking hands, but they're shooting them where they need to shoot them. And once someone gets there, that's kind of like one of those psychological hurdles where you're like, okay, this guy's ready. The guy that gets stuck shooting the hands
mm.
is the guy who's like, okay, he can't seem to keep building. And then of course in the hands, a bunch of our targets it would be a radio, it would be a phone, it would be a book, it would be a knife, it would be a whatever, and that was that distinction that you were supposed to make, and then again, it gets more complicated. Is the phone a detonator for an IED? You know, but usually if it's just a phone, you're not supposed to shoot the guy. So I think just because the training got so much more involved, that dilemma, and then I guess to elaborate on that, um, even aerial assaults, helicopter assaults, when we would come in, we would really set the conditions where it was only bad guys, you know, or if it was something we really had to do, that's where it comes in when I talk about in the book, like, hey, we're going to have civilians to shoot around. Are you going to be able to do this? And that's a double-edged sword, right? Like when you have men that can separate the chaos and isolate the threats, that's an incredible sword to wield. Um, and luckily, it never, from missions I was on, it never cut the wrong way. But it was something I was always looking at. How sharp is that sword? How precise can you guys be? Um, I never wanted to take that for granted.
Yeah, that I'm looking forward to talking about that. But before we get there, can we go back to do you remember your first sniper engagement in Panama?
Yeah, the very first one I write about in the book turned out to be a not kill, and that was one of those where after we had secured the airfields and we moved to Patia Airfield, and we were securing these different places in Panama City. Um, we moved out into the mountains to kind of look for. We were patrolling in the mountains to find the remains of the PDF, or his. I can't remember what he called his kind of elite guard. Can't think what they called him, but he had like a bunch of like thugs that were on the run. Um, and I was put in it. See what's funny, and the whoever my sniper spotter was is going to have to remind me. I don't even remember who my spotter was, because it was a two-man position. Um, so yeah, if you're out there and you remember who it was, shoot me a call. Um, so we were put in an overwatch position, and the platoon was moving through the jungle, and my responsibility was to when they were in the last cover to conceal position, the LCC. Uh, if the guy was armed or if he was a threat, I was supposed to drop the guy, and then they were gonna move on through. And that was one of those where I laid there for a while, and I watched this guy just like act like a dad. Once again, not in uniform. Kind of the mix match uniform, civilian clothes. His kid was there, chickens running around, goats running around, um, and M16 laying up against the wall on the porch, and just thinking, dude, I was thinking back to that guy with the 38. It's like, dude, I hope you choose well. Like if you grab that gun, and like I'm sitting here with a high powered sniper rifle, and there's a platoon of Rangers coming behind me. Like, dude, recognize what it is that's happening, and he did. Yeah.
And you talk a little bit in the book, which is fascinating, about some of the differences in killing
Yeah.
and how some of it is impersonal and some of it is personal. And I think what might be surprising to people is what's personal and what's not.
Yeah.
So can you talk about the different types of engagements or different type of killing?
Yeah. And almost all of it is impersonal, right? Like almost all of it is this very sense of a detachment. Um, Not to mean aloof or belittling, but it's like it's very mechanical or even surgical. Like I would say, a doctor, right? Like a surgeon can't be so uh, wedded to you as Dalton it starts to cloud what it is he's doing. He needs to look at your body as a machine, and he's the mechanic, and he's opening up your body, and he's fixing what he needs to fix. I mean, he
Mhm.
can't get stuck on the fact that I was just talking to you and I learned about your son or that, you know what I mean? So I look at it as like a doctor in the surgery. They're very detached
Mm.
from the fact that this is a human, and yet they're acutely aware that this is a human, right? Like any little mistake I make, I nick an artery, I do this or that. I'm taking a human life. So I think it's a similar mentality, if that makes sense to the listener. You're detached, and yet you're hyper aware that what you're doing could result in life or death. Um, so that's where I think most of it was separated. There were times where we were there to wreak vengeance, and Panama was different, right? Because I didn't know anything about these people. I didn't have anything against the PDF. I still don't have anything against the PDF. They were just they were in the wrong uniform. You lined up on the wrong side of the chessboard. You know what I mean? We're the white pieces, you're the black pieces, you know what I mean? Jump off the board or you're getting knocked down. Um, and that's how it was with the beginning of Iraq. The Iraq invasion, working with the Kurds, the Iraqi army. Dude, it was linear warfare. They were in trenches, they were shooting artillery at us, we were shooting artillery back at them. You know what I mean? It was a very linear fight. They were soldiers in uniform. Um, and then when that devolved into insurgency and a counterterrorism fight, we were no longer army against army. You were army against individuals, and you got to know those individuals and those targets. Like I mean, you knew their pattern of life. You knew who their family was, who their friends were, what kind of clothes they wore, what kind of vehicle they drove. You had all sorts of technical collect on whatever, however it was that they were communicating. So that became very personal. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it didn't. Now, when you would hear that they raped somebody or killed somebody or kidnapped American soldiers and tortured them and murdered them or strung some people up from they hanged people or burned people or blew up a vehicle-borne IED at a kid's soccer game, like that had a little bit more like, you're gonna get some, bro. But does that make sense? It,
Yeah.
it was never really that personal. It was more of, um again, it's why I call it a game. It's still why I use the term skull games. I looked at it as a game. We stack up our pieces, you stack up yours, you know? Um, and even in a game of chess, you know, uh, even if you're a grandmaster in chess, you're gonna lose a couple pieces. You can't, unless there are like those super quick magic opening moves where you can win checkmate without losing anybody, but those are rare, right? If you or I sit down with even a 10-year-old, 12-year-old kid, I'm gonna lose a couple pawns, and I might have to sacrifice a bishop for my move. I mean, like you still lose pieces. So I don't want to diminish that fact, but that's part, again, as a professional soldier, I recognize and realized, hey, there's pieces we're gonna lose. That's part of the game. I want to create it where it's that opening move where we don't lose any pieces.
Mm.
And that can happen sometimes, but you also have to accept, um, you're gonna lose some. And what you hope for, just like in a game of chess, that pawn doesn't go away forever, right? That pawn is taken off the board and lies down next to the board, and then it recuperates and recovers, and it comes back to the fight for the next game. So I don't want to overplay, but I also don't want to underplay this analogy. Guys got hurt. We not all A lot of us got killed. You know what I mean? Like we lost dudes, but way more people got wounded. So it was that acceptance of, you're going to be taken off the game board for a while, and you're going to go through some hell, but you'll be back. And that's kind of how we worked it. Um, so I think that level of personal, impersonal, um, especially in the beginning of the war, because I understood just how evil Saddam Hussein was, um, and really what it was he was up to, and how he just reigned through terror with all these different folks. I was very hopeful that we would be seen as liberators, and we were initially. Um, we were slow to recognize the growing insurgency, and we'll talk about the complexities of that. But I really did believe for years that if we kind of wiped the slate clean for the Iraqi people, that they would have an opportunity to resurge to a level of eminence that they used to be. The Babylonians, right? The Assyrians. Iraq has a history of dynasties and and intelligence and art and music and science, and just an incredible group of people it's just been pushed down. And the partners that I worked with, both the Iraqi partners that I worked with and the Kurdish partners that I worked with, they recognize that. They recognize that the United States and the coalition partners gave them the space to recreate Iraq into a world leader. And they were patriots, man. They were young men that were patriotic and willing to give up everything for a new vision of a respectable, honorable Iraq. And that I saw that, and I talked with these guys, and I had hope in that. Um, and then even with the next generation, giving that next generation opportunity. When we first came to Iraq, I mean, the little kids thought we literally had cloven hoofs and horns on our heads and tails. Like they were told we were devils, and we raped babies, and we raped all the women, and like they were really, really afraid of us. So once they got an opportunity to meet us and see the kindness and generosity of the West, of Americans, even of the American soldier, it really turned the tide, and I was really, really optimistic. Um, and I might have been slow to become pessimistic. I remember the first time a guy, his last name is Taylor, very, very well known dude out of the unit. He said he said something in passing on how we're not going to win the war in Iraq, and I got pissed. I was like, "What are you talking about? Of course we are." And he looked at me like, "What aren't you seeing?" So I think I had my head in the sand for a little while, but I'll also never forget um, when I was I don't remember where I was, but when I was when I was in special forces, I went on a target, and we killed the dad, and he was a monster, right? And the interesting thing when you kill these monsters is nobody really protests. The wives don't cry, the kids don't cry. So one, I think there's a level of just recognition that this is the world. What's the word I'm looking for when you just think it's kind of a foregone conclusion, not existential, but there's this particular word for it. I don't remember, but I think they just recognize, again, life and death. It's not so far away for people in the Arab world. You know what I mean? They still have 8 kids to make 5. You know what I mean? And they're slaughtering their own goats. So like life and death has a different closeness than it is to us. So I think that's part of it. Part of it also is these men were monsters. They were abusive. They were abusive husbands. They were abusive fathers. You know what I mean? So it's like when they were gone, a lot of the kids and wives weren't going to miss them. And then I also think there was just this level of pragmatism that they know dad's an insurgent, dad's a terrorist, dad's working with ISIS, my husband's working with Al Qaeda. Like when he gets killed, are you surprised? It's kind of like people in the mob. You know what I mean? Like when the mob boss gets knocked off, should wife be surprised? You know? So when you when you would kill these guys, nobody would protest. No one would cry. And the couple of targets when somebody would make us all be like, wait a minute, someone cares about this guy? Do we got the right guy? Because it was very, very rare. They just understood, like, Americans are going to come, and they're going to kill them. They're going to kill all these men that are involved in this terror organization. Like it just is what it is. Um, So wait, I went into Iraq and it killed this guy, and his son was there. And I remember his son was hiding behind. See how your drapes are? His son was hiding behind the drapes, and we saw his feet. It's kind of like when a kid plays hide and seek, you know. And we were clearing the house, and the dad and a couple other terrible humans we had killed, and we were going through the rest to figure out who was who, and all the women were separated, and 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 there was the kid hiding behind a curtain just like that. And we pull him out and we talk to him, and he was like relieved that this nightmare that he was living. He was afraid every night that the Americans would come and they would land on his roof and take his dad. You know what I mean? And again, I might have missed it in translation, but it wasn't that he missed his dad. He just was tired of living in this nightmare, knowing what his dad did. There was a time when I remembered this kid's name. I don't remember it now. The dad and the kid, and I thought, okay, we ate with that family, we ate with a kid, we talked, and we left, and he was smiling, and I thought, okay, he was maybe 12 to 14, probably, yeah, probably closer to 14, and I'm thinking, okay, see, this is what I'm talking about. This is the next generation. They're going to see we're not bad people. They're going to recognize and understand and see that we're giving them an opportunity to create a new Iraq, and to be on the world stage and in a position that I believe they deserve, you know. Um, and 3 years later, I was on a target and we killed that kid. He had joined the insurgency and he was with Al Qaeda and ISIS. And it was then that I realized we ain't gonna win. Like my
Wow.
optimism that we're showing the next generation of who they can be and what they can be was was wiped out. And I don't remember what year that was, but it was that event where I was like, we ain't winning because we're doing our damnedest to cut the cancer out, but nobody's doing anything else. Where's the rest of the world to come in and reinforce and rebuild Iraq? Who who came in to invest in Iraq? Iran, and we let it happen. China. We we owned the infrastructure. We controlled the infrastructure. We controlled the oil. We controlled the phone lines. We controlled the power grids, and we handed all of that over to Iran and China and Russia and the old Cold War opponents. And even before that, none of us came in with that reinforcement of that narrative of this is a new day, this is a new dawn, Iraq. Let's be something and do something. Instead, the narrative was let's look back to 1200 years ago when we had a Muslim caliphate, and let's recreate this Muslim caliphate that controls, you know, millions of square miles of the Mediterranean and Middle East. So they didn't look back to the golden years of what we would expect of the golden years of, because even in the caliphate, it wasn't like history and science and art and music was thriving. That was an oppressive time frame, you know. Um, so yeah, we missed our opportunity. We missed our opportunity in Iraq. The world missed its opportunity, and it was the same with Afghanistan. We missed our opportunity. Man, I was a surgeon every night, multiple times a night, multiple times a day, cutting cancers out, and nobody was was backfilling, teaching them how to eat right and how not to smoke and how not to drink and giving them the chemotherapy. You know what I mean? It was such a hugely missed opportunity for the world, and it's disappointing.
I was listening to you tell that story, specifically when you started on, families not necessarily being upset as you think they would be when you come in and kill their dad in front of them. And then obviously, my thought was, don't these things, as a kid, what my perception would be is, if I'm an Afghan kid, these big Americans with beards and futuristic shit on their faces come in and kill my father in front of me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to pick up an AK
Yep.
and join the insurgency. And now we kind of touched on this before, but your job as a special operations soldier or a Delta Force operator is not to win the war, right? That's for the people in air-conditioned offices in DC to figure out. Your job is to fight the war. But that doesn't change the fact that once you go in and kill somebody, once you go in and kill that dad, you're creating the next cycle.
Yeah.
And that's a really heavy thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that one's complex. And I think where we tried to counterbalance that was elevating the honor and pride of being that Iraqi warrior or that Afghan warrior, right? Like, so, other than the aerial assault stuff that we did, everything I did was buy through, and well, again, I guess there was specific CT stuff with the unit, but most of what we did was buy through and with our host nation partners. So there were always Kurds and always Iraqis and always Afghans with us, and we put that face onto it. So it wasn't just such a stark decision of, oh, these weird foreign Americans. Mixed amongst us was what we were trying to create was like this alternate decision to be a defender, protector, patriot of Afghanistan, defender, protector, patriot of Iraq. And they did look, again, you look like superheroes, right? You got the body armor, you got the Gucci weapons with all the optics, the nods, the helmet, everything. So we tried to sway the public, young men specifically, with which team do you want to join? Do you want to join this team of this gang thugs who are running around like blowing bombs up in the market, kidnapping children for ransom? Or do you want to be this guy, this Afghan super warrior or this Iraqi super warrior? So there was a way that we were trying to counterbalance that, but even that had negative implications, because what we did as we put an Iraqi face on things and as we put an Afghan face on things, we began to believe our own lie. The Iraqis were never ready for us to turn over sovereignty to them and leave when we did. Case in point, the rise of ISIS. ISIS was destroyed. Al-Qaeda was largely non-existent in Iraq. There were pockets of it in Syria. But we pulled out prematurely and left this vacuum for Iran to completely take over all of eastern Iraq, to include the oil fields all the way down to Basra and the ports. ISIS reconstituted itself. So we believed our own lie. We believed the Iraqi warrior patriot, and I'm guessing the equivalent to that would be the Iraqi politician. You know what I mean? Or statesman. Like, did we ever think there was an Iraqi statesman that wasn't completely crooked, or working with Iran, or same with Afghanistan? So we began to believe our own lie, and that was one of those things that we used to talk about at our level, especially in Afghanistan, is like, hey, no one's really thinking about handing over this all back, right? Like, they're not ready. They don't have this superhero scarecrow that we built. It's a scarecrow. This guy has no idea how to run his country. This guy has no idea how to do all of these things, let alone the logistical tail, right? I can put body armor on you. I can give you a weapon and I can give you ammo, but I can't teach you how to sustain helicopters and vehicles and teach you logistics and communications and how to keep the radios clean and what I mean? All of that still had to come into play, and we just didn't do it. So the work to counter this freedom fighter, mujahideen, Afghan rebel warrior or Iraqi rebel warrior that our opponents put on display, we tried to counter. But again, to me, that was all I thought was to buy time to see real tangible results. So I think it's very difficult in that isolated instant where you're like, I killed this kid, now he's going to join the resistance. But I also think it's the wrong explanation for what went wrong, because again, it's very isolated and limited warfare. How many people did we kill? And it's nowhere near the numbers that people want to talk about. You know what I mean? So you kill the one kid's dad, and 3 guys join the Al Qaeda or ISIS. Okay, but you're not able to keep the lights on. You're not able to have running water to an entire village. But Al Qaeda seems to get the water on. Al Qaeda seems to get the electricity running. Al Qaeda seems to get the oil and gas to us. You know what I mean? So you see, even the way we discuss this is like, guys, you got this all wrong. The problem isn't the way we're doing the war fighting. The problem is the way we're doing the peacekeeping, the rebuilding. So for every one freedom fighter terrorist that I created, the inability to build infrastructure and provide a sustainable way of life for villages and cities and counties and provinces, you created hundreds of them. So, hey, politicians and Department of State, I have an idea. Be a little bit more introspective on how you screwed this up. Why does the soldier have to carry that burden? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've never understood that. Even this idea of the soldier who makes a mistake and kills an innocent person. And we highlight that. Again, that's the village is upset because they don't have the basic necessities to live. That's not the soldier's problem. So we continue to shift the blame, and that's what we do in America. We shift the blame to the lowest common denominator, a young Marine private who felt like the vehicle that was rushing up on his checkpoint was a VBID, so we shot it, and it turned out to be a mentally handicapped somebody or somebody driving his wife to the hospital because she was pregnant. Like that's the scale. That's the thing that's going to tip the war, dude. If winning or losing a war is contingent upon that tiny little isolated incident, you better rethink what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I asked you that question so you could educate me on it, because obviously in the context of this conversation, we're talking about the granular, right? And we do hold people accountable to a degree when it comes to the big picture and the bureaucrats, but that part of the conversation, I think, is something that's really important.
Yeah, and it's not dissimilar to what we're facing in America, where you have this culture. I don't know what to call it. I'll call it thug culture. Again, I don't know if that's inappropriate, politically incorrect. I don't know. I'm going to call it thug because it's not racially driven. It's often socioeconomically driven. It's the lower class folks who don't see a way out, who are drawn towards heroes, right? Something heroic. And I'm sorry, who do we have on a pedestal right now? The gangsta or the cop? Who do we sing songs about? Who do we make movies about? Who do we promote? Even the stupid ass way we speak is emulating this thug culture. I don't get it. It doesn't end well. You know what I mean? So it's this same idea again of where it's just like you incarcerate somebody for X, Y, and Z, and that just creates another guy who's angry at the government. Really? You're blaming the cops again? The reason we've got the rise in crime and the violence and gangs and thugs running giant swaths of land in America is because the cops are corrupt? Or because we have a political and an economic system that's not coming in and backfilling this vacuum that's created when you try to take the cancer out, you know? So if we're not honest enough to look at how we've made these mistakes in like this petri dish of warfare, man, we're not being honest with ourselves on what the solutions need to be for in America.
So you have a break in service in 92 after you get back from Panama. Come back in 97, go to 2nd Ranger Battalion this time. And so you go to SF selection right afterwards. So we'll kind of jump ahead through all that since we
Sure.
already started talking about Iraq. Can you tell the story of the terrorist that you call Rami in the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Um, Rami and Rami and Sammy, Rami and Sami Finifin. They were brothers. I don't remember the tribe that they were from. I could remember it, but there was the Al Ubaidi, El Takis, and the Al Samarai. Those were the kind of the main tribes, and they were all vying for power. And one of the things we constantly looked at was even the tribal affiliations with somebody like Al Qaeda. So if the tribal leaders would say we're on Al Qaeda's side, that was pretty dramatic. And what you didn't want was all the tribal leaders to decide that they were going to be on Al Qaeda's side. So that was again, we constantly were trying to drive that wedge. So if the Ubaidis said they were going to partner with Al Qaeda, we made sure that the Al Takis stayed mad at the Al Ubaidis. You know what I mean? And it was just kind of this game. Again, I mentioned to it briefly of what people recognize of like the mafia. It's tribal mafia stuff. You've got the Bambino family and then Gambini family and the Gambinis and the Bambinos. They have an alliance, and you know what I mean. It was all that. It was just like that. Tribal's tribal, family. We call it tribal. You call it family. It's all the same thing. So we were constantly trying to figure out who was aligning, what their alliances were, when they were mad at each other. We would do things as SF guys and say, "Oh, the El Takis did this," and you know what I mean. So we were constantly kind of reading the tea leaves and trying to have all this division amongst each other. Again, a very unrecognized part of the war. You know what I mean? And this is again, I learned this from history. It's what we've always done. We'd go capture, kill a guy, and say the El Takis did it, and then the El Beidis would fight the El Takis, and we'd watch them kill each other, and then you know what I mean. And that was really where the special forces guys were getting that battlefield force multiplier, you know. And what's interesting is there were conventional commanders that understood that better than my special forces commanders. You know, I I remember like because too many of our special forces commanders were living on forward operating bases and like surrounded by a conventional army and not really feeling and seeing the threat and really what it was. Um, they got a little bit too far removed from what I believe the special forces mission would, should be, and it's by, through, and with host nation partners. So we would assess, select, and train host nation partners, and then we'd get them on target. And to me, to this day, I believe that's the mission of special forces. That was not clearly understood by some of our commanders. Some of the best conventional forces I fought with clearly understood that. Sammy and Rami Finifin, again, I don't remember which tribe it was that they were after, but they were like gobbling up like the market share of the fuel. They had like this black market going on where they were they took over the power company. They were running the fuel. So a lot of the tribes, again, it's organized crime, right? We're sitting here in Jersey, like no one knows who runs the garment district, who runs the jewelry district, who runs the meat packing plants and the tanneries. Like it's all old school mafia, and these guys were monopolizing all of this type stuff, and we began to see them aligning with Al Qaeda so now the money. I don't really care that much, right? Like it's one thing to have a tribe control the fuel and control the power grid. Like that's a power balance that's really hard for us to work through. But now that money and that control starts getting handed over to Al Qaeda in Iraq. Can't have that. So now it's time to go talk to Rami and Sammy. And I talked to them and said, dudes, we're the biggest kid on the block. So if you're going to continue to partner with Al Qaeda, we're going to come get you. Or you just keep it contained, blow off Al Qaeda, and I'll let the status quo be the status quo. And they basically said, you don't get it, man. You guys already lost. I have to work with Al Qaeda. And now we're back on the chessboard, right? Like, okay, you made your move. So we ended up planning a big operation. I was a captain, but I was the lead planner on it, and all sorts of people played. And we were going after Sammy and Rami and all of their lieutenant. They all lived in this one village, or were going to be in this one village at this particular time, and it was going to be one night of the long knives. We used to call that too, a night of the long knives. It was like, hey, we can hit these guys over the course of time, or in one night we'll hit 15 targets and we'll just take them all down at once. And this was going to be a night of the long knives. So we planned this mission and we went into this village. And again, I'm forgetting if it was Rami or Sammy. We got one of them. It was really successful. Very, very little bloodshed, if any. I don't really remember any killing. I think it just went off like clockwork. It was just a terrific military operation. But we couldn't find, let's just pick one, Rami. I can't remember which one it was. We couldn't find Rami. And, once the op has kind of done its thing, so you have the main operation, right? Let's just say it moves this way. It all moves like that. I'm busy as hell, doing all sorts of stuff. And then once you kind of arrive at the forward line, or where things are done, now it's the back clear. So everybody, elements come back. And they back clear and make sure they touch and feel and do, because even like you run through this room and you're clearing it for bad guys, that's all you have time to do. Well, now you got to come back and open all the doors and kick open the chair, and do everything. So when the back clear is happening, there's very little for the officer to do, because the objective secure, what I mean? All the protective perimeter is put in, and now guys are just tearing through stuff, looking for stuff, interrogating prisoners. There's not much for me to do. And that's usually when I just kind of bebop around, and kind of get a feel for, like, I'll talk to the women, I'll talk to the kids, I'll talk to the old men, walking through the houses and stuff, and just kind of getting a feel for, like, what does it look like? What's different? Am I sensing anything? And the back clear was happening, and I went into this room, and there's all these women clustered in a corner. And like maybe 5 or 6 women, and like 4 of them are facing us, and then 2 of them, one's facing the opposite way, and one's kind of sitting on this bed, facing the other way. And we come in, and it's cold, and they're just kind of standing there in their normal dress, and I asked through the translator again. This is all through a translator. None of them are speaking English, but again, to shorten the story, I ask, one of the women some question, and they don't want to answer. And I ask again, and they don't want to answer. And they're just kind of like really like not making eye contact. And I can clearly see they're shivering. And I don't know if they're, again, goes back to my story. Are they shivering because they're cold, or are they shivering from fear? I don't know the difference. I can't tell. But they were acting weird. And And that happens sometimes because sometimes the ladies hate us. Some of them, some of them are tried and true Al Qaeda ISIS chicks. So I tell the medic who's with me, hey man, get him out of this open area and put him in that room where all the kerosene heaters are and the blankets and let him be more comfortable. So he tells them to move, and they don't move. And that was weird because usually they're very happy to get out away from our presence and into some place that's warm, you know. Something isn't right. Something isn't right. I'm like my spidey senses. And finally the medic, he kind of walks over there and he like shoves them and says, he starts pushing them like, hey, get in this other room. And then the woman that was sitting on the bed, she stands up. And immediately I'm like, "Guh-guh?" She's like 6'2", you know. She ain't a cheat. I'm kind of realizing at the same time, like, that's a man to that's a big chick. You know what I mean? Like, like I'm not really, it's not all coming together yet. And then he turns around and he faces me. And now again, it doesn't take long, right? Because as I'm looking the guy up and down, I see he's got boots on. You know what I mean? I can see pants underneath because as tall as he is, the little dress only comes to here. I can see his pants and his boots. You know what I mean? His big ass feet. And I'm like, that's either a goonie goo goo or that is. And then he turns around, and I know Sammy and Rami. I've met them. I've talked to them, and it's whoever I said it was. It was Rami. And I look at him, and I go, Rami. And he's got that little baby, and he has a knife in his hand. Uh, he just says, "Hey, you need to let me go now, or I'm going to kill the baby." And he's kind of holding the baby like almost like you would hold a cat with its scruff, because he was holding it like this, but then he's got it because the baby's all wrapped up, and he's like holding it like this. You know what I mean? He's got the knife and this little baby that's kind of like just kind of hanging there. The baby was wrapped. Like his arms are like this, but his feet are all like wrapped in like a little blankie thing. And he says, "I'm gonna kill the baby." And I look at Rami and I said, "I don't know that baby. I came here for you." And he looks at me and I look at him and I start to raise my rifle, and he's just like, "Ah," and he throws the baby and the knife down on the bed and puts his hands up. And then we arrest him. And that was the end of Sammy and Rami. They went to prison. Now, well, again, Sammy, Rami, if you're listening, give me a call. I'd like to hear where you're at now. I mean, I don't know. I lost track of those guys because after this, I went to the unit and it was kind of different mission sets, and they didn't. There was some crossover over time, but I don't know what happened to Sammy and Rami Finifin. They might be millionaires in Iraq right now. But this is one of those cases, and when I talk about the title of my book, again, I didn't even. It wasn't intentional that when the book Where Have All the Heroes Gone, a pilgrimage through the Bible, the battlefield, and back home again. It really wasn't intentional that that's exactly what that book is. It's my personal pilgrimage through the Bible, through the battlefield, me coping with and like recognizing and dealing with some things on the battlefield that I really didn't think through, and then coming back home and some of that closure, and I when I was when I was writing the story and retelling the story, and I don't allude to it in the book, I think I leave it kind of this cliffhanger if I was bluffing or not. But the reality was I wasn't. Again, you talk about personal and impersonal. It's not that I didn't care about that kid, but I was there for Rami. And if he killed the kid, I'm killing Rami. You know what I mean? So I didn't really. You just this happens faster than I'm able to tell this story. All of this happens fast, and it's one of those instances in the book where I'm writing this out and I'm just like, man, I didn't care about that kid. I didn't want the kid to die, but it was like, the game is afoot. What do you want me to do? He's there, knife to the baby. He whipped that card down. You know what I mean? And the card in my deck is not you go free. You know what I mean? I have two cards in my hand. One is you die, and the other one is you get handcuffs put on and you go and you leave with us and you go to prison. I don't have a card that says you go free. You know? So I hope people understand that and appreciate that. I did not want to see that baby die. And of course I thought about, can I shoot Rami so fast in the lights that he won't be able to stab that baby? But I didn't think I could, because my gun was down here and he, you know what I mean? And he was up here. So yeah, I don't know how this lands with listeners. But I hope, if you're a soldier out there and this is something that you're wrestling with and you don't know how to put it into terms, maybe this idea of like, you gotta play with the hand you've been dealt with, right? Like, dude, I didn't choose that hand. You know, I didn't set those conditions. So, uh, I don't know. Maybe someone else would have let Rami go, but that's not me, and that's not any good special forces soldier I know, and that sure as shit ain't a Delta Force operator. And you know, the Jack Nicholson type stuff. You know what I mean? You need me on that wall. You need men and women that can separate this. That war requires that. Not everybody, but you need a group of people that are professional and meticulous with this decision making and don't get bogged down in the emotion. You have to have that in warfare. Um, but we also need to know how to heal those people when they come out of that. Because I think that truth, that I was prepared to sacrifice that baby for Rami, even you know, I think that truth, I always knew it. I didn't really face it until I wrote that book. You know what I mean? And I don't feel guilty about it today. He's the monster, not me. Monsters do monstrous shit. And even though it's a little dramatic, uh, again, that term of monster hunters, like, I don't know what else to say. Monsters do monstrous shit, and those of us that hunt monsters have to accept that they do monstrous shit.
Right. There to do a job, man.
You know, yeah, uh, I don't like that term though. I know what you're saying, but it's not a job. You know what I mean? It's a profession. So I don't know. You know what I mean? A job and a profession are two different things. I was a professional soldier. It wasn't my job. It was my profession. I don't know if that makes sense. You look quizzical. War was my life. For years, it was my life. Every waking moment, I did nothing but think about war. I could be watching Ice Age 2 with my kids, and I'm thinking about war. I could be at the soccer field watching my boys play soccer. I'd be thinking about war. That's not a job. I studied up one side and down the other. Warfare, from left to right, up and down. Who succeeded when, and how they succeeded. Um, so yeah, I'm not trying to nitpick, but you just hear that like it was my job, or it's what I was told to do, or I was just following orders. No, it was my profession. I don't know. I don't know how else to explain that.
It makes sense when you lay it out that way.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I guess kind of like, again, we're using the sports analogy, right? Michael Jordan's job wasn't to play basketball. Someone who thinks their job is play basketball, they don't become Michael Jordan. You know, my hobby is jujitsu. It's not even my job. It sure as hell isn't my profession. You know, yeah, I'm thinking through, and again, and I think one of the reasons, I mean, it really, it really kind of hit me was because it was it was more important than anything else. It took priority over being a husband. It took priority over being a father, a son, a brother, an uncle, a friend. That ain't a fucking job. And these guys who let their job take priority over their being a husband or a father, like, fuck that guy. If you think your job working at Wall Street or your job doing X, Y, and Z is more important than your family, you're wrong. You know what I mean? And I guess there may be some of those guys who understand what I'm saying. And they're like, oh, my job isn't a Wall Street trader. My job isn't a lawyer. That's my profession. Okay, now you're getting close. Again, like Michael Jordan. What do you think came first to Michael Jordan? His wife and kids or basketball? Basketball. 10 out of 10. And I think that's a reality that soldiers need to appreciate too, because we even play this game where we're like, God, family, country. You know what I mean? Like, God comes first, then the family, then the job. And it's like, dude, who are you kidding? Who are you kidding? And quite honestly, if that's who you are, I don't want to go to war with you. I want to go to war with men and women that this is it. And you're able, I was able to turn it on and off when I was home to a degree. So anyway, I hope we stumbled on something that's interesting to people. Um, and definitely the men and women that are out there that maybe are being self-critical, that they lost so much for a job. Hey man, it wasn't a job. It wasn't a job to me. And if you worked with me, then no, it wasn't a job for you. You were on my ODA, that wasn't a job. You were in my troop, that wasn't a job. That was your profession. And it's what we asked of you, and it's what we expected of you. And I know it was a lot, but cut yourself some slack. Yeah, again, it's what I like about podcasts. It's like what I like about good podcasters and the experience of writing the book. You learn these things that you're like, oh, I didn't really think about it that consciously before.
So we could cover a bunch more from SF, but let's fast track it to the unit, and
Yeah.
then depending on how we finish, we'll come back to it.
Okay.
So at what point do you, I guess, hear about the unit or decide to go to selection?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, the first time I heard about the unit,
Delta Force, by the way,
Yeah,
just to
Delta
be
Force,
clear
yeah,
here. I keep
yeah.
calling it the unit, and this is a
Yeah.
funny thing that we keep talking about.
yeah,
But
I prefer to call it Delta Force, because I think it's the least, at this point, the least kind of secret squirrel way. Like, people that call it what it used to be called and all that kind of stuff, or even the unit. I'm going to definitely fall back to calling it the unit because that's what we used to call. But again, the elephant in the room with some of this stuff is, our ethos at Delta is you don't go on podcasts, you don't write books, you don't talk about it, and I agree with that 95% of the way. But there, you know, someone could squabble like, dude, you're way past 5%. So okay, I got it. But I think we need to talk about it. We owe it to our mates to talk about it. We owe it to our country to talk about in the appropriate way. You know what I mean? Um, because it's an experience that is critical to our nation's history. It's critical to the health of our communities. Um, it doesn't have to be self-aggrandizing. You know what I mean? And that's why we don't talk about it, because people get they get prideful and they brag. That's not my intent. So I do want to talk about it, certain things. The very first time that I had ever heard of the unit, because back then it was the guys behind the Hardy Boys, they called them, the guys behind the fence. I can't remember what else. The D Boys, you know what I mean? Um, and every once in a while, when I was first rangering, like one or two dudes would disappear, and they were always like our best guys. I remember Sergeant Williamson. I can't remember the other guy's name. They would like they would disappear, and you'd be like, "Oh, what happened? Oh, they went to the Hardy Boys. They went behind the fence." It was like, damn, they get some good dudes. And it just kind of came and went. But I was focused on being a ranger. Like that's what I was doing. And then one day, I think we were at Fort Campbell, because Savannah is so small that you don't have a lot of ranges and things at Hunter Army Airfield. So we would do a lot of training at Fort Campbell and Fort Bragg, and then obviously at Fort Stewart. So I think we were at Campbell, and I was running a heavy machine gun range, and I get a call over the radio, "Hey, range control shutting down the range," and I'm like, "We're Rangers? Like we're the shiznit. Nobody shuts down the Rangers. Like what's happening? They're shutting down the range. Another unit is coming in that has primacy. That's what it was. Because I'm like, what? There is no unit, more has primacy over the Rangers. I don't know what's going on. This Black Hawk helicopter lands. These dudes jump off the helicopter, and I shit you not, dude, they are dressed like they just came from the Delta Force movie with Chuck Norris. They got jeans on, different boots, the black dyed old Army green cap, the black watch cap. I mean, everything but the rope around their chest. I mean, it was. I kid you not. They come out, and I'm just like, I had no. I thought they were the strangest looking dudes, and they were all older. Again, we get skewed, right? Like when you're 19 or 20, you think someone who's 35 looks like he's 50. You know, um, and they get off the plane, the helicopter, just a handful of them, and they got all these kit bags and duffel bags, and they unload this ammo, and we're all put in the bleachers. So we're sitting in the bleachers, and these guys come out, these old men, um, and they start shooting all sorts of different grenade launchers. And they come out and they shoot, and they're taking notes, and they're talking, and they're taking notes. A guy's got a clipboard, and they're there for maybe 10 minutes. And then, the dude comes back. He's like, "Hey man, we really appreciate it. I'm really sorry that we shut down your range. I'm really sorry. We just had to get this done. It was my bad. If I can ever make it up to you." And I'm just like, "Who the fuck are you guys?" And he's like, I'm Bill. This is Jim. This is Fred. Blah. You know what I mean? I'm just like, and they get on a helicopter and leave. And I'm probably an E5 at the time. And I'm like, I ask another NCO, I was like, "Who are those guys?" He's like, "Oh, those are the D boys." And I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the guy who shuts down the Ranger range. You know what I mean? So then I began to understand a little bit more about who they are and what they did. I certainly didn't have much of an understanding, because we just didn't talk about it at all. And I started training to go to selection. And then when I put my packet in, they denied it, because I wore glasses back then, and my correctable vision, or my worst vision, it wasn't in the parameters that they wanted. And I had gone over this before. To go to scuba school and sniper school, I had to get a waiver for my eyes. And the unit said no, you don't. We don't do waivers. And I was upset. That's what I wanted. That was the next thing that I wanted to do. I didn't know if I want how much I wanted to stay in and all of that. So I ended up getting out. I got out a kind of a disgruntled ranger, like, the army won't let me do what I want to do. Forget it. I'll go do something else. I'll figure it out. And I ended up running in college, cross country and track. Um, and then when I went out to Montana State, they had an ROTC program. So after a little while, I thought, hey, I've learned a lot rangering. I'd be glad to share some of that knowledge with the cadets. You know what I mean? As far as all of the, the common level tasks and skills and things. So I started working with the cadets just kind of as a hobby. Like this. I had a beard. This track runner who used to be a ranger, combat vet. He's helping us out. And then slowly but surely, I was like, oh, ROTC commissioned. One of the things I thought was interesting was organizational psychology. So, helping select and build these teams, because it was really rudimentary. Really, when I went through all of these selections, it was just like survival of the fittest. Who can withstand the most shit, and we lost a lot of good dudes. And as I was studying psychology in college, I was thinking, hey, there's a better way to kind of like assess and select people to come into Rangers or Special Forces and Delta Force. And at the same, just what coincided with this was the mid 90s, is that program was starting to take off. Other people were beginning to recognize, like, hey, we need some people to kind of professionalize how we do this. And that was the route that I was taking. I was like, okay, I'll go back in as an officer and I'll help Rangers and Special Forces and maybe ultimately Delta figure out how to assess and select and retain, soldiers. Um, and as I was doing that, a friend called that I stayed in contact with, who was in the unit, and he said, "Hey, man, they're starting to take corrected vision. If you get your eyes done, you can come back as an officer if you want." And I made a few calls to make sure that was legit, and I decided then and there to stop pursuing a graduate degree in psychology, and that I'd come back in as an officer and try to get to the unit as quickly as I could. That's an 8-year gap either way, because you have to have a company command or an equivalent of that before you're even eligible to go to the unit. So again, my opportunities were going infantry ranger and for a few years and trying to get to the unit. I had the SF piece in there. So once I was eligible, I put in my packet to go, and I felt very prepared. The ODA I had, the Operation Attachment Alpha I had, just happened to be the best ODA in 10th group. Like they had won awards. Like it was a really good ODA, and it was just by luck that I came in and took that ODA over. A couple of those guys went on to the unit, so it gives you an idea of kind of the caliber of the dudes. On a 12-man ODA, you've got one or two guys that, they're just, yeah, they're kind of mediocre. Maybe three guys. You usually have 6, 8 guys that are pretty shit hot. This ODA was really good, and it felt, once I got to the unit, it felt very similar.
Mm.
The caliber and even like the fighting that we did and the style of the fighting and the amount of fighting that I did with that ODA was real similar to when I got to the unit. So I didn't feel like it was a leap from what I had done previously.
Do you know much about selection prior to going?
Nothing. Nothing. Yeah. The only the only thing that I know is the piece that I share in that book, which and this is an old friend of mine who I talk to all the time, and he is the guy who has no qualms with calling me and saying, "Dude, you need to tighten it up. You're sharing too much on podcasts. Get back in the box." I'm like, "Okay, man, I'll clean it up." Um, and he's like, "I never told you this, but I remember he told me, again, when you're getting to the end of selection, you cross a bridge and you have an opportunity to go the road or fight the mountain laurel, and at all costs, don't fight the mountain laurel." Um, and lo and behold, I get to the end of selection, and I cross a bridge, and I'm looking at the map, and I have a chance take the road or follow the mountain laurel. And I take the road. And I'm thinking I'm done, you know, and I run all the way to the next checkpoint, and it wasn't the end. There was more to go. Um, so it was towards the end, but it wasn't the end. So the again, I hopefully my buddy's not pissed that I'm sharing this on a podcast. Um, it's in the book already. If you're in selection and you get this far, bro, like good on you. Um, the point I wanted to make was the one piece of info that I had actually backfired.
Oh,
I mean, and you meet these guys in it was in special forces selection and in unit selection that have like the whole thing G2'd. Like they know, hey, this is the map sheet, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing today. You know what I mean? And I enjoyed being ignorantly blissful, and that's what I recommend to anybody who's considering these selections. Dude, just take it one day at a time. They'll tell you what you need to do. They'll tell you where you need to be. They'll tell you how heavy your ruck needs to be, what the packing list is, what you know what I mean? Like, don't I saw so many people get screwed over because they thought such and such was going to happen and it didn't. So they're shifting, you know what I mean? And it was that was the single piece of information I had, and it almost broke me. So that's my recommendation for anybody. Do not try to figure out what selection is for any of it. Just do what they tell you to do, you know, and they give you plenty of time to adapt. Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, and to me the biggest difference with the unit is it's very ambiguous. You know what I mean? Most of the other selections are telling you very, very prescriptively, this is what we need from you, this is what we want. It's much more ambiguous, and I find that fascinating because they're having an opportunity to see you make decisions. They're seeing you kind of weigh out the pros and the cons, and that's the first look. That's the first thing that they're looking for and assessing you on as an individual. How does this guy individually deal with adversity? How does this guy individually deal with ambiguity and difficulty and all these types of things and problem solving? And once you pass that gate, now when you're in the operator training course, they're seeing how does this guy fit into a team? How does this guy understand how these are the plays we run, and this is how we run the plays, and you need to run them the way we run them. The time to be creative and create your own plays, that's a long ways down the road from here.
mm.
So it's a fascinating multifaceted look that I think they get through that program than anywhere else that I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess in selection, a term that's used a lot with the unit is the unit's not always necessarily looking for the best guy; they're looking for the right guy. So, right in selection, I think it's pretty commonly known that you're doing everything on your own, and there's a lot of land nav and the 40-miler and such. And so, as it pertains to kind of the right guy, um, what comes to mind when you think about the right guy to be an officer at the unit?
Hmm. That's a good question because you threw me for a loop because you talked about an officer. Um, I think the officer needs to be adaptable. He needs to be a tactician and a strategist. Um, and I think humble is a huge word because you're coming into this organization like the friend of mine that I'm talking to you about. He got to the unit in 1992. I got there in 2005. He'd been in the unit from 1992 to 2005. And there are plenty of NCOs that they're there 15, 20 years before you arrive. So I come in as the officer who's in charge, right? And it's like, dude, what are you in charge of? you're really you're in charge of, like, we talked about this on the way here. You're in charge of the battle plan. What is it? How are we going to fight this war? When we go down range, who's doing what? How are we integrating? You're in charge of the integration. How am I integrating my troop with other troop, with squadrons, with the greater mission of the battle space owners? How am I managing all this kind of stuff? So you're this ultimate integrator, and really understanding what the troop wants to do, what the NCOs in the troop, how they view themselves, what they want to be, what they want to do, and then just trying to make it a little bit better. I kind of equate it to, a Super Bowl winning team. Like, let's say you won the Super Bowl one year, and the for whatever reason the coach leaves and a new coach comes in. Is he going to rewrite everything, or is he going to go, "Hey, how'd you guys win last year?" You know what I mean? And, "Oh, I think we can tweak this. I think we can tweak that." And that's what my role was. If you're so prideful that you think you know what's going on, and you're also very much an interloper, the other magical thing is, like, these guys, not only are they there 15 to 20 years, they can be on the same troop for 15 to 20 years. So they've all worked together forever. They know all these jobs inside and out. And you come in as a troop commander for 2-ish, maybe 3 years if you're lucky, and then another guy rotates through. So I'm like the fifth guy they've seen as a troop commander. You know what I mean? So you need to bend to their culture and their personality. And I think bend to it and help them recognize what it is. When I came into the unit, the troop that I took was super aggressive, and they were known to be super aggressive. And I had to make the decision of, is this the right way to do things? Like we seem a little narrow in the way that we're fighting. Like we're taking it hard to the enemy right down the middle every time. You know what I mean? But then I look at it and it's like, but we're winning. No one's gotten killed. No one's gotten hurt. We're winning every time. So while it doesn't necessarily on face value seem like it's the right way, it's working for this troop. And when I look at the individuals in the troop, specifically the team leaders that really drive the personality, it's like, these are the right guys for this style. So I'm not changing a thing until something else changes. We start getting guys scuffed up. We start getting guys killed. We start losing missions, not succeeding, not capturing, killing the guys that we're going after. We'll relook it. But in the years that I ran that troop, and we took criticism, and I still bear that criticism. And I said the same thing. Look, I got it. It didn't work for that troop. It didn't work for that troop. You guys are thinking about how to refit and reform and kind of redo your offense. But is anyone arguing that it works for this troop? The proof's in the pudding, man. And we'll run the ball straight up the middle every single time. Try to stop us. So I was very proud of that. And I like to think, and maybe I'm kidding myself, if we would have run into issues, that I would have had the wherewithal or the ability to adapt and move the platoon or the troop. But the thing was I came in on another troop. So there was a troop commander that ended up moving out, and I got an opportunity. So I had two troops. Both of them had different personalities in the same squadron. What worked for one troop did not work for the other. So, and they had slightly different missions. And then I was given a third troop when I shouldn't have had a third troop because a troop commander ended up moving on. And I took that troop over while they were in Afghanistan in combat. So it was the same thing. It was like, okay, these guys have already been fighting for a month. They've been together for years. They've been fighting for a month. How do I come in and make this team just a little bit better? And lucky for me, they were very, very much like that first troop. They were like, look, man, we run it down the middle every time and we shove it down their throat. And it's working every time. Anything you want to change, boss? Nope. It's what I'm used to and it's working. And it's new to Afghanistan because there was a time when we weren't in Afghanistan. We were completely occupied with Iraq and Syria and the surrounding areas. And this was reintroducing the Delta Force into Afghanistan when nobody was running it down the middle. And we did. And it was hugely successful. So does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And again, we with this jujitsu analogy, right? The way my son does jujitsu is different than the way I do it. The way it's different than this pro, this other pro, and you have to make part of it is making up for your own physical weaknesses, your own philosophies, your own mentality, your own kind of culture. Um, and warfare is so big, and there's so many different facets of it that there's a way to shape it all to win every time. You just gotta be really attuned to it.
Mm.
And one of the biggest things that I'm proud of is I fought hard to a fault. When we got in theater, we fought hard, hard, hard to a fault. I've never lost a dude. I've lost some Iraqis and I've lost some Afghans, but that was also by design. I didn't want them. I didn't want to lose them, but they're moving into positions that I don't want my guys to move into. That's just part of it. So, I think I have one or two Purple Hearts from guys that I've worked with over the years, and those were really, really minor incidences. So, when you stack up the audacity and the ferocity of the people that I fought with how safe it was, it's mind-boggling. And I do attribute some of that to the grace of God. Um, but it's warped kind of my extension then in warfare, where we've talked about if you're going to win a war, then hit him in the nose. And after you hit him in the nose, hit him in the nose. After the second punch to the nose, hit him in the nose again. I saw it work. I saw it work as a ranger. I saw it work as a special forces guy. I saw it work as an operator. And I've studied warfare. I saw it work for Napoleon. I saw it work for Alexander. I saw it work for Rommel. I saw it work for Eisenhower. I saw it work for General Hal Moore. I mean, you go through history from Thucydides all the way up to the present day. Punch him in the nose. This dick dancing around that we've been doing as a country, it never worked. Because our enemies are tough.
So one last question on selection. So obviously you're there at selection so that the cadre and the instructors can see, does Jeff have what it takes to be a member of this unit? But you're doing everything by yourself, and you're also in a way finding out if you have what it takes.
Yeah.
So I guess what did you find out about yourself in that regard?
It's a good question. I had huge advantage because of my and again, this didn't happen by accident, right? I was an ultramarathon runner. I was an adventure racer. It's what I did as a hobby. That Bill that I talk about in the book was my best friend, and we did everything together, and we raced together. So we climbed the mountains, we swam the rivers, we kayaked the rivers, we biked, we hiked. I lived in Colorado Springs at altitude. So the fitness level that I had, and even the years of navigating when I was a young ranger, gave me a huge advantage over other folks. It wasn't an advantage that was just sprinkled on me. Like I worked towards it. So the physical aspect of selection wasn't overwhelming. It was the nagging fear of just not making it. You know what I mean? Um, and again, I think we arrived at this earlier today, and I have to relook this because I guess I have to admit, I didn't. It wasn't that I wanted more to be in the unit. I wanted to more be the man um that the unit was looking for. So again, I haven't really thought about this. It's rung hollow with me when people were like, I really wanted to do this or that. You know what I mean? But so I do think failure would have meant a lot to me. It would have meant to me I don't measure up as a man. I don't think I realized that at the time. You know what I mean? And I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's a fair thing to say. Um, but I think we do it to ourselves, you know. And I really caution to say that because it never was my identity either. You know what I mean? Like and hopefully this doesn't be conflicting. It was my profession in my life, but it still wasn't my identity. I had a multifaceted identity, and when I took that, here's where it doesn't clash. It wasn't about being an SF guy or being a unit member. It was about being a man who was prepared to fight and defend for what he believed in. And that's who I still am. So even when I took that uniform off, I wasn't confused. I didn't lose my identity. You know, um, I will protect and defend the vulnerable until the day I die. And that just has different from the time I was 12 years old, finding my dad's gun to protect my brother and sister from some creepo, to hopefully when I'm in my 70s, I'm mentoring and advising folks like you and your age how to pick up and take it from where we left it. And we're already doing that with Skull Games. We're developing that next generation to be able to hand that off. So that's why it's hard for me to see these things as separate. Protect and defend women and children. Protect and defend the vulnerable. The oppressor libere, free the oppressed. Like that. That's what it was for me. And I think part of it was, am I man enough to do that? Am I the right man to do that? And then part of it too was the opportunity. Do I get that opportunity to do that? Um, yeah,
Makes sense. So, OTC.
yeah.
How would you describe OTC?
So as again as luck would have it, I had my leg broken in OTC. So during one of the combatives jujitsu sessions, I broke my leg. So I wasn't halfway through it, but I was partway through OTC. And I was put on pause, and I had a redo. Obviously that was I was really disappointed with that, but in hindsight, um, it made my second OTC easier. It was overwhelming. It was, so it starts and it's just layer. It's layer like, carry this, carry this, carry this, carry that, and that's by design. It becomes overwhelming. And, I like to think I would have gotten past it, you know what I mean? But it was getting heavy, 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 heavy. My leg got broke, and then I had the reset. So when the second one came through, that first those first building blocks, I was already ready. You know what I mean? And it didn't seem as it just wasn't as heavy. Um, and the other thing that I think was a blessing in disguise was because I had a broken leg. Um, they put me into some staff positions, and I went down range, and I was able to see behind the curtain. I was able to see the unit in action in Iraq, and I supported them from a tactical operations center point of view. I was an operations officer, so I was able to meet the troops and meet troop commanders and meet troop sergeant major and see how it is they fought and see how it was integrated into the bigger picture, or how it wasn't. So in that, I don't know what the time frame was. It was probably 6 months. No, it would have been a little bit shorter. I don't remember. I don't remember. however it takes long to heal. You know what I mean? Like maybe 4 months, 3 or 4 months. I don't remember. But in that 3 or 4 months, I was able also to find what I thought what my duty was as an officer there. So I really wasn't sure. You know what I mean? Like because you're not being assessed and trained to be an officer until the end. They kind of like, okay, because the point is that we do everything the NCOs do. So A, we understand what the NCOs go through. B, it's an easy way to respect. Like, you didn't do anything I didn't have to do. You know what I mean? We all did the same. And it's really just towards the end where they're like, okay, you've proved yourself in this role. Now we need you to be the officer guy and do this. And even that, it wasn't a whole lot of training on how to be an officer in the unit. You kind of had to figure that out as you went. I like to think they probably have a course now. I think maybe they do. And in fact, I think my friend Bill, before he left the unit, actually developed something where it's like, hey man, we need something to like train officers to be unit officers too, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure. So that was I was able to see officers and kind of be like, I don't like that. I like that. Oof. Ah. And kind of put together, just like I talked about when I was a young NCO. I looked at Ranger NCOs and I was like, I like that. I don't like that. You know what I mean? So I was able to kind of build this idea of who or what I should be doing. Um, and it pretty much came together then through the second part of the training course, and then when you walk across the hall. And I think there's a thing I like to share. I talked about Hal Moore a couple times, who Fort Benning is now named after, and Hal Moore in his book, when he talks about battle, he said there's two things a battlefield commander needs to constantly be asking himself: what should I be doing right now? What am I not doing that I need to start doing? And I think that's kind of common. Like, as things are unfolding, a decent commander is always like, okay, what am I not doing that I need to be doing? And again, even as you're going through your checklist and getting all this kind of stuff, that's the common sense thing. Oh, what am I not doing that I need to start doing? But Hal Moore spun it and he said, a really good battlefield commander also asks, what am I doing that I need to stop doing? Because sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not right. And the first time I read that, it really clicked. I don't remember when I read it, but that's kind of the way that I view things, and that gave me that opportunity, that time when I was healing up, to be able to figure out, oh, this is what this guy should be doing. Oh, he should stop doing that. Oh, you know what I mean? So I felt like almost had a leg up when I was able to come in. And again, those fellow NCOs that were there, it was like, this guy's full of shit. He sucked. It's like, okay, this is my story. This is my story. Yeah.
I give up. So you broke your leg doing jujitsu, and don't they make you guys fight each other at the end of that combatives block?
Yeah, but yeah, yes and no. I mean, yeah, I don't think it's all that dramatic.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just fighting just becomes, you have to get used to just fighting. You know what I mean? And I think, yeah, I don't find it anything out of the ordinary. Yeah. I think you'd expect it.
Right.
Like, hey, these are guys that need to understand, like, if they get swarmed with a couple dudes, what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? You know what I mean? Like, somebody blows up and squares up against them, what does it look like? When should I de-escalate? So you just, the very specific scenario training, they cover a lot of that. And then when you get to the units, the squadrons and the troops, you kind of work from there. You kind of look at what are we going to be doing? You know what I mean? Let's say you know, uh, hey, we got a lot of guys doing podcasts. Okay, what does a podcast room look like? What if Delton goes ape shit? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do? You got a knife? Where's your blade?
Yeah.
So you just kind of talk through all of these different scenarios. You've got your base things that you need to do, but then all of these other what ifs.
Mm.
It's almost kind of fun, and I think that's what's incredible about the unit, is like, those guys are freed up to just prepare. You're not marching around. You're not doing police call. You're not on some other duty, you know what I mean, security guard somewhere. Like, you are just preparing for conflict, battle, and the gazillion other things that is part of your responsibility.
Mm. Yeah. So last question on OTC. I mean, it's I think the more well known stuff. There's obviously we covered a little CQB. There's a lot of CQB in
Hmm.
OTC. I guess what you would think: breaching, marksmanship, explosives, maybe some tradecraft. What was your favorite block of instruction?
In OTC, man, that's a hard one because I think the culmination, like it all comes together at the end, right? Um, but I think what I think is interesting is where you start is basic marksmanship. You get a rifle with iron sights and you shoot like you were a private, standing, kneeling, prone, known distance ranges, target. You know what I mean? So it's like you don't do anything in the unit that they didn't teach you. They literally teach you how to tie your shoes. They'll tell you how to tie your shoes. They'll tell you how to blouse your boots. They'll tell you how to wear a t-shirt. You know, um, they don't expect anything from you that they haven't given you the best TTP to do it, which I find amazing. Um, so you come in and just like you said, you fight each other at the end. Yeah, but it's like but we learned the jab, we learned the uppercut, we learned the roundhouse. Like you practice all this stuff. So by the time you get to the culmination, it's really an insignificant event. Just like the culmination when everything's integrated. You're jumping, you're coming out of helicopters, you're doing all this kind of stuff. It's obviously the funnest part, and I guess I would say the culmination also because that's really the first time you have that role as an officer, right? Like otherwise you're just a guy in the stack, learning the trade skills. Um, Once it's the culmination is when you're actually the officer who's on the radios and controlling all of the things around you. Um, it's just amazing. I mean, it's the professionalism of selection. It's the most professional thing I've ever seen. The professionalism of the training course is the most professional thing I've ever seen. Um, yeah, I feel so lucky and blessed to have been part of it, you know, and it just boggles my mind. The men and women that are there, they all went through it. And you met a couple of us. You met Brent, and like, dude, it's just normal. It's just normal folks. Like I said, I was an ultra marathon runner, adventure racer. I was all these things. I was a track and cross country Division 1 athlete. All this kind of stuff. But most of the guys they're just hardworking dudes, man, and they don't want to. They don't want to be known. They don't want any fanfare. They just want to do this at the best of their ability,
Mm.
and it's just a remarkable thing to see.
So I just wanted to ask you about like there's a draft, right, to determine who goes to what squadron,
Yeah,
essentially. So when you were a troop commander, and I guess maybe an example when you went to your first troop, who were the run it up the middle guys?
yeah.
Who did you look for in draft candidates? What was like a
I was never involved.
okay.
Yeah, I was never involved in it. Um, yeah, and I think it was probably one level higher of the officers, like the squadron commanders and above, were more involved with it. Um, and then obviously the NCOs. I mean, it's heavy NCO business because I mean they're living with the guy. You know what I mean? And they really understand the nuances. Um, so yeah, I know it exists. I never I mean, I'm trying to think if I've ever I mean, I've been in rooms where we kinda talked about dudes, but usually the rooms I was in to talk about that kinda thing was like somebody wasn't fitting in over here or he made a mistake. Does anyone still want him? You know what I mean? Yeah, and that kind of a thing. So it's not as purely like you were talking about the draft. It would almost be like the off-season trades kind of thing.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like, hey man, this dude's a good dude. He's not really fitting in. with this troop or this team, does somebody want him? Or, hey, I think he'd be good over here. I was involved in those discussions, but like the guys coming across the hall fresh, I don't remember being in those discussions. And then the other ones that I remember being in was because you'd have these teams and troops, and even at the squadron level, that had a certain culture. It's like, hey, do we want to begin to try to change that culture? Do we need to soften it? Do we need to toughen it? Like how? And if we're going to, how do we do that? Who are the right people to put those in? I just didn't make it to that level in the unit where like that was me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's largely NCO business, and then I think just a handful of officers probably at the squadron and unit leadership that ultimately bless off on it. Because quite honestly, it's one of those things. It's really none of my business, Like I'm in a troop commander's in there for 2 years, a squadron commander's in there for 2 years. So it's like, Jeff, we really, like honestly, why do they care what I think? You've got to live with that guy for the next 20 years. So it's not quite that contrasting. But honestly, if somebody would ask me, I think 9 times out of 10, I would, my troop, I was like, whatever he thinks. What do you think? You know what I mean? Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. No, for sure.
And I think that because there's so many things that the unit does, everyone knows the assaulter, right? And that's the base human that we pull in and we recruit and we promote is the assaulter. There's all sorts of other things and elements that they do, and some guys are better suited for that, And to me, those are the discussions that I remember having. It's like, this guy ain't a great assaulter, but man, he is awesome in language, or he's awesome in logistics, or he's awesome in X, Y, or Z. And it's like, hey, he's super smart. Maybe he should do this, and just kind of helping put the guy in the right place. Because we already assessed he's the right guy. We just don't have him in the right position, and guys were usually given a chance or two to test out what that right position is. And if it became like too hard for us to find the right position for you, it's like, okay, it's time to move on. These targets that we were going for, he's a mass murderer. He's going to burn the village. And they're blowing up children's soccer games and markets and mosques and schools. And he showed himself once. This guy's a ghost. We're never going to see him again. So we either kill him right now with what we have, or hundreds of people are going to die.
What we're talking about here is an operator making a shot from a moving helicopter on a moving vehicle.
Yeah, it's insane. This guy's on a motorcycle, driving to the market with a vest on to blow up 100 people. You don't do that to Americans. The Delta Force still exists. We will kill you, your family, your village, your pets, your goldfish. When the black helicopters come, everyone dies.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. As you could probably tell, this is a brand new channel. So if you got anything out of this at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I see every like, I read every comment, and I appreciate all of it, especially in the beginning, because as you know, that kind of support goes a long way on these platforms. So most importantly, I have some awesome guests coming up in the future for interviews. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But again, thank you for your time. Appreciate the support, and hope to see you again soon.